Hi guys. Tonight we slip quietly into the freezing heart of a medieval castle, where the air seems to breathe frost and the stones themselves feel like slabs of ice against your fingertips. You draw your cloak tighter, but already your nose stings from the sharpness of the wind sneaking through every crack. The night promises no mercy. The walls loom around you, built thick to withstand sieges, but you quickly realize they also trap an unrelenting chill. You probably won't survive this long without a good fire or a mountain of blankets that you don't have. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is on your clock. Now, dim the lights, let the world outside fade, and step across the threshold with me. Your boots crunch on frozen gravel as you approach the castle's stone face. A moat lies below, its waters hard with ice. Above, arrow slits glow faintly from torchlight inside. Each gust of wind pushes through your cloak, clinging like icy fingers. The reality strikes you. Yes, these walls were made to repel armies, but they also trap the cold as fiercely as they lock out enemies. The stone breathes dampness, sucking warmth away faster than you can make it. You glance up and see patches of moss, even in winter, clinging to the mortar between blocks. That's how wet and chill these stones remain, year after year. Historians still argue whether builders of early castles thought much about interior comfort at all, or whether defensive strength mattered so much more that freezing was simply accepted as part of life. Either way, you're standing in a fortress designed to withstand fire, battering rams, and treachery, but not to keep your toes warm. The air smells of smoke mixed with wet straw drifting from within. As you push toward the gatehouse, your ears pick up the echo of iron chains and the creak of wood. The portcullis above rattles faintly, its spikes rimed with frost. The sheer thickness of the entry wall makes you shiver, not just from cold but from imagining what it must be like to storm this place in winter armor, ice forming on your visor. Still, you're the one outside tonight, wishing to come in, and the cold air bites all the harder because of it. Your hand brushes the stones. They're not just cold, they're clammy, damp as if sweating ice. And the walls are so thick, sometimes 10 feet deep, that once you pass through them, you'll feel that same dampness wrap around you inside. Builders of the 12th and 13th centuries didn't have insulation as we know it. The concept would have been absurd. Instead, castles were about permanence. They outlived families, outlasted dynasties, and endured winters that froze entire rivers solid. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. In some regions, villagers believed the stones themselves harbored spirits that could chill or comfort the inhabitants depending on how they were treated. Some swore that splashing wine against a wall at Christmas ensured kinder winters. You wonder, as you rub your frozen fingers across a block, whether this wall received its yearly blessing or not. The drawbridge beneath your feet creaks as though groaning under its own frost. Wooden planks, swollen with ice, flex slightly, and for a moment you imagine slipping into the moat below. It's frozen, yes, but the idea of crashing through that thin crust of ice into black water beneath makes your teeth chatter harder. With each step forward, you leave the wild night behind, but the cold is following you through. You pause under the archway, staring into the shadows. A line of icicles glitters from the vaulting above like jagged teeth, dripping slowly from the faint warmth inside. One drop lands on your cheek, sharper than a pin. You close your eyes and realize that inside this fortress, comfort is not guaranteed. It is only rationed, only borrowed. Historians still debate whether residents grew accustomed to this endless chill, their bodies hardened over years, or whether even the mightiest lords wrapped themselves in layer upon layer, muttering curses as the frost refused to loosen. You suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. Yes, humans adapt, but as you shiver now, it feels impossible that anyone could ever truly get used to it. From the courtyard ahead comes a faint barking of hounds. Their voices carry in the wind, sharp and echoing against the walls. The smell of straw thickens. You know that animals generate warmth, and perhaps their presence was not merely practical but also a crude form of heating, a reminder that life persists even in bitter seasons. Your boots scrape the threshold as you cross into the castle proper. The moment you pass beneath the heavy arch, the night's roar dims, muffled by thick walls. Yet paradoxically it feels colder still. Without the wind, you notice the stillness, the damp pressing into your lungs. Each breath is visible. Torches sputter, struggling against the damp draught. Shadows climb and vanish along stone ribs above. And as you stand there, the realization grows. This is not a cozy refuge, but a vast stone refrigerator. A mighty stronghold, yes, but for comfort? For warmth? For sleep? You hug yourself tighter and whisper into the hollow dark. Could you ever truly rest here on the coldest night? The heavy wooden doors loom ahead, scarred with iron bands hammered flat centuries ago. You push at them, and they groan like old beasts disturbed from slumber. Their hinges shriek, sending a shiver down your back as though the sound itself were colder than the air. Inside, the hall yawns open, and yet the frigid air refuses to stay outside. It slips easily beneath the thick threshold, curling around your ankles like a mischievous cat with claws of ice. You pause, boots damp from melted snow, and notice how the doors themselves bear witness to the endless winters. The planks are swollen and warped, their surfaces veined with cracks where the cold has pried for centuries. Each winter, moisture crept in, froze and expanded. Then the thaw opened those wounds wider. In a way, you realize, the castle itself ages not from battles but from endless negotiations with the seasons. Historians still argue whether castle carpenters truly mastered methods to prevent such decay, or if they accepted that maintenance was a yearly ritual, as natural as the harvest or the spring thaw. A faint draught brushes your neck, and you glance down. Even with doors as heavy as ship timbers, gaps gape at the floor. Rats might slip through easily. Certainly the cold does. You huddle deeper into your cloak, but your toes still sting. Imagine trying to sleep when every night the door at the bottom of the stairwell lets in icy air, spreading upward like water seeping into dry cloth. A quirky tidbit lingers in the margins of memory. Some medieval households stuffed those cracks with wool, moss, or even dung to block drafts. Imagine crouching at midnight, pressing handfuls of sheep's fleece into gaps, hoping it would stay through the long dark months. Practical, if not exactly pleasant, and in a world where survival trumped all, dignity often froze before fingers did. Your eyes roam upward. Iron bolts and crossbars are embedded in the wood, each as thick as your wrist. These locks could keep armies at bay, but against the subtle creep of frost, they are powerless. It's strange, isn't it? Humans poured skill into resisting violence, yet the real invader, the cold, slipped in without resistance. You trace the line of the bar with your finger, feeling how it cuts cold straight into the bone. Inside the narrow vestibule, torchlight flickers but does little to fight the shadows. The damp smell is stronger here: mildew, scorched pitch, wet wool. The walls, as thick as a wagon is long, make the space echo strangely. Each bootstep is a hollow drum. And yet, though you are finally within the mighty gates, the sensation persists. You haven't escaped winter. You've simply traded the open blizzard for a chambered chill. You rub your arms trying to warm them and let your imagination drift. Centuries ago, a servant might have stood right where you stand, shivering as he closed the gates for the night. His breath fogged like yours. Perhaps he leaned close to a torch, daring a moment of warmth before returning to the icy barracks. You wonder, did he curse the same drafts you feel now? Did he pray for dawn when frost crackled louder than footsteps? Your boots crunch against a scatter of straw. Someone has strewn it here to soak up the snow dripping from cloaks and boots. You smell its faint sweetness, a reminder that animals once shared this space during sieges. The thought comforts you briefly. Warmth of beasts, the steady steam of their breath. Yet now, only shadows accompany you. You push deeper, the sound of the door closing behind you fading to a heavy sigh. Ahead, the corridor narrows, its arch ribbed like a stone throat. The cold gathers here, funneled as if the castle itself inhales you. Wooden doors may close, but nothing closes against the air seeping through every crack of stone. Historians still puzzle over whether medieval people layered doors intentionally for warmth or purely for defense. Some sites suggest two sets of gates, creating a trap not just for invaders but also, perhaps unintentionally, for the worst of the winter gales. You pause in that narrow space, imagining yourself as a gust of icy wind caught, slowed, broken into eddies. The design might be accidental comfort, or perhaps subtle wisdom. The records remain silent. You glance at your fingers, reddened from chill, and imagine fumbling with a latch in darkness. What if fire threatened? What if raiders came at night? To secure safety, you must first open doors heavy as trees, their bolts reluctant, their hinges screeching. Safety is never simple here. It demands strength, and even in peace, each lock is another reminder of how small you are against the world's harshness. A low hum carries from deeper within. Voices muffled, the crackle of a fire somewhere ahead. For the first time, hope stirs. Perhaps warmth waits beyond, yet the draft underfoot insists otherwise. It snakes past your boots, climbs your legs, and despite every promise of comfort, the castle still reminds you, this is stone, not sanctuary. The more you walk, the more you notice the iron studs on the door heads shimmer with frost crystals. They sparkle faintly in the torchlight, tiny jewels made not by wealth but by relentless cold. And here lies one of those ironic truths. While tapestries, banners, and gold leaf boasted grandeur, the first thing a visitor felt was not splendor but a slap of icy wind. Castles may have dominated landscapes, but inside, they humbled everyone equally. Your hand brushes the grain of the wood again. Rough, splintered, it scrapes your palm. And you realize, people didn't polish these doors for beauty. They left them coarse because who would caress them? Who would admire them? They were made to endure, not to please, just like the people who lived within. A sudden drip echoes from above. You tilt your head. Somewhere in the stone ribs, snowmelt seeps and trickles even now, reminding you that nature always finds its way inside. A droplet lands on your hood, sliding icy down your cheek. You curse softly under your breath or maybe just in your thoughts. Yes, these doors may be heavy, layered, fortified, but comfort hides elsewhere. So you shuffle forward, drawing your cloak tight, shoulders hunched. You feel the immense pressure of stone, timber, and history around you. Yet, despite all this grandeur, you're still cold, still shivering, still wondering whether you could ever fall asleep in such a place, with drafts curling through every seam and doors that groan as if reminding you, winter owns us all. The corridor narrows, and you step deeper inside, following the faint glow of torches. The wooden doors you passed now groan shut behind you, and suddenly the faint crackle of fire grows louder. The darkness thins ahead, and you notice how the torchlight paints uneven shadows across the rough stones, stretching them tall one moment, shrinking them the next. These flames, sputtering in iron brackets, provide more illusion of safety than real comfort. They throw just enough light to remind you of what the darkness hides. But when you hold out your hands, the heat doesn't reach far enough to warm your chilled fingers. The air is smoky, heavy with the smell of resin. Drops of pitch ooze from the torches like melted wax, hissing softly when they strike the cold floor. You imagine a servant stumbling along these same corridors, their torch dim, heart pounding as the shadows twisted like figures waiting to leap out. A torch was never simply a tool for light. It was also a frail shield against the unseen. Chronicles from the 13th century describe how travelers in castles often carried personal candles, fearing to step anywhere unlit, even in their own lodgings. The darkness wasn't just inconvenient, it was a living presence. And for many, the thought of what could lurk in it was more terrifying than the cold itself. The flames sway when a draft snakes through an unseen crack. Your breath fogs, and you realize the torches are fighting a losing battle. Fire devours oxygen, and in these closed spaces, smoke lingers, stinging your eyes. Yet without them, you would grope through pitch blackness, trusting your life to memory and touch. That sense of constant half-light defined medieval interiors, too dim to feel safe, too smoky to breathe easily. You pause beneath a vaulted arch, gaze lifted toward the ribbing overhead. Carvings twist up their faces, grotesques, worn and half erased by centuries. Were they guardians, meant to frighten away spirits? Or were they masons' idle doodles, whimsy captured forever in stone? The jury remains out on whether such figures had religious significance or were simply decoration. Some scholars lean toward symbolism, others toward artistic freedom. But either way, you can't help feeling watched as you move through this half-lit throat of stone. A curious little footnote to torchlit life. People often carried dried herbs like lavender or rosemary to mask the acrid stench. Burning pitch left a bitter tang in the air, and clothes reeked for days. Imagine lying down to sleep while your cloak smelled as though it had been dipped in tar. Some even believed rosemary protected them from evil spirits stalking the shadows, so tucking sprigs in a sleeve was both practical and supernatural insurance. You walk further, and the torches grow fewer, until their pools of light overlap only faintly. Between them lies darkness thick enough that you imagine it pressing back. The stone walls glisten with moisture, and when you drag your fingertips across them, your skin comes away wet and numbed. The torch sputters when a stray drop of condensation falls onto it with a hiss. For a moment, you picture the flame going out completely. Then what? You would stand frozen in blackness, unsure which way the corridor bent, fumbling along walls that all feel the same. The flicker of the flame makes your own shadow dance grotesquely. Its head elongates, limbs stretch, sway, shrink, as though a mocking partner taunts you along the passage. You take a slow breath, forcing calm. Imagine living like this daily, with shadows as constant companions, flickering and bending, always present, always deceptive. One well-documented reality is that castles were never fully bright inside. Windows were narrow for defense, and glass, when available, was rare and thickly bubbled. Most households depended on firelight and candles, which meant rooms were always half obscured. Day or night, people lived in a twilight haze. For us, accustomed to switches and steady bulbs, such dimness feels suffocating. For them, it was life. As you pass another wall bracket, the torch crackles and spits resin. The smoke coils upward, painting black streaks along the vaulted ribs. You imagine centuries of soot accumulating, layer upon layer, until the stones themselves seem darker than night. Some cathedrals and castles today still bear these stains, permanent reminders of lives once lit by flame. You catch a whiff of something unexpected: animal fat. Candles, when they were used, were often made from tallow, rendering hallways rank with the smell of burned meat. Beeswax was the luxurious alternative, far sweeter, but scarce and expensive. So most nights, you would fall asleep not just in cold but also beneath a haze of bitter smoke and greasy air. Comfort, you realize, was always conditional. Your ears prick at a sound, the flutter of wings. Bats sometimes nested in the high beams, stirred by the firelight. Imagine lying in bed and feeling one swoop overhead, wings brushing your cheek. Stranger still, some communities believed bats in castles were spirits of the dead, circling restlessly until dawn. Whether superstition or nuisance, the idea adds another shiver that isn't caused by cold alone. You stop to rest, pressing your back against the damp wall, torch in hand. The stone chills even through your cloak, and you wonder how anyone slept against it. Did people ever press closer to the fire, not just for warmth but for light, to keep shadows at bay? The darkness here isn't like night in the open fields. It is heavier, confined, layered, each shadow a possible hiding place for your imagination's worst fears. Smoke curls around your face, making you cough softly. You realize how much of life inside castles involved enduring discomfort. Poor air, poor light, poor warmth. Survival was never about luxury. It was about accepting misery as normal. Still, there were moments of wonder. The dance of flames painting colors across tapestries. Shadows flickering like ghost stories come alive. Those same inconveniences created a mysterious beauty. You pass under another arch and glimpse the glow of a larger fire ahead. Perhaps the great hall lies just beyond. Relief tugs at your chest, though you know even the largest hearths barely chase away the cold in rooms made of stone. Still, you quicken your pace, drawn to the promise of brightness. Behind you, the corridor seems to swallow itself, torchlight receding, darkness reclaiming what was briefly borrowed. And as you walk toward that glow, you realize something important. In this castle, light itself is fleeting, fragile, more valuable than gold. Fire is warmth, yes, but it is also vision, safety, and courage. Without it, sleep would be impossible. And even with it, you suspect your dreams would be filled with the same flickering shadows that haunt these walls. The corridor bends, and suddenly the space yawns wide. You step into the great hall, the heart of the castle, where the ceiling soars above you like the inside of a vast, frozen cathedral. A fire roars in the central hearth, logs stacked like fallen timbers from a storm, sparks snapping and tumbling into the smoky air. For a moment, you feel hope. At last, warmth. But as you edge closer, you realize the fire's reach is limited. Your face prickles with heat while your back still aches with cold. This is no cozy living room fire. It is a bonfire that refuses to spread its generosity beyond arm's length. The smell here is thick: roasted meat, spilled ale, smoke clinging to wool, dogs sleeping in the rushes. The floor is strewn with reeds and herbs, crunching under your boots, hiding the dirt of years beneath their fragrant cover. One well-documented reality is that castles rarely had bare stone floors exposed. Rushes were spread across them for warmth, to mask smells, and sometimes to absorb waste. They were changed occasionally, though occasionally might mean months in winter. Imagine lying down near the hearth, your cheek against rushes that had soaked up spilled beer, sweat, and worse. Comfort was never quite clean. You wander further inside, eyes drawn upward. The rafters vanish into shadow, hung with banners and perhaps the carcasses of smoked game. The firelight doesn't climb so high. The ceiling feels endless, like a night sky indoors. Wind moans faintly between beams, rattling loose shutters somewhere high above. Even here, in the supposed center of warmth, the cold refuses to surrender. A curious little detail emerges. In some castles, residents tried to hang tapestries along the walls, not only to impress with color, but to soften the chill radiating from bare stone. They were early insulation, woven pictures doubling as draft stoppers. Yet you know how fragile such defenses were. Behind each hanging lurked damp air, creeping freely into the hall. The woven knights and saints could not fight the endless winter pressing its face against the walls. You sink onto a wooden bench, the surface polished not by care but by generations of bodies shifting restlessly. The seat is hard, cold, and creaks under your weight. Before you stretches a long table, scarred from knives, sticky with old wax. You imagine meals here, noisy, crowded, the air hot with voices but never quite warm enough to melt the frost clinging at the edges of the room. Even while people feasted, their breath still fogged in the air. Academic opinion splits on the question of how effective these great fires really were. Some argue that the hearth in the center, with its vented roof, did create pockets of livable warmth. Others suggest that unless you sat almost inside the flames, you might as well have been outdoors. Your own skin, prickled on one side and icy on the other, testifies silently. The truth is likely somewhere in between. A hound stretches at your feet, rolling onto its side. Its warmth tempts you, and you envy the servants who curled against animals at night. Dogs and cats were more than companions. They were fellow heaters in a world with few other sources of comfort. Stranger still, some households believed sleeping with a dog on your chest could prevent illness by driving away damp humors. Whether superstition or simply good insulation, you'd gladly try it tonight. From the corner comes a creak of wood. A servant stirs the fire, sending sparks flying upward. The sparks vanish into the darkness overhead, as though swallowed by an invisible mouth. You notice smoke drifting across the hall, trapped below the beams. It stings your eyes, makes you cough softly. People lived daily with smoke curling in their lungs, their ceilings blackened like cave walls. Chronic coughs were as much a part of life as the frost itself. Still, the hall offers something the corridors lacked: community. You picture long benches filled with soldiers, retainers, musicians, laughter booming, the clash of cups, the beat of drums echoing off stone. In those moments, perhaps the cold felt less sharp, dulled by noise and by fellowship. Perhaps survival depended as much on the fire of company as on the fire of wood. You trace your fingers along the grain of the table. Here, generations carved initials, scored dice games, spilled wax from guttering candles. The wood itself feels alive with memory. Sitting in this hall, you sense continuity, centuries of people huddled together, waiting for spring, sharing food and fear. This awareness wraps around you like a second cloak, thin but strangely comforting. A low draft curls beneath the door at the far end. Even here, the great hall is not sealed. Cold seeps relentlessly inward. You imagine winter nights when the fire dimmed, embers low, and only the sound of wind remained. In that silence, with frost creeping across flagstones, sleep would be an act of stubborn defiance. You close your eyes briefly, hearing the crackle of the fire. Its warmth is partial, fleeting but hypnotic. You almost drift off, lulled by the alternating kiss of heat and slap of cold. And yet, even half dreaming, you are not safe from the chill. The great hall may roar with fire and feasting, but come midnight, when torches gutter and laughter fades, the cold returns, patient, eternal, waiting in the shadows just beyond the fire's glow. You shift restlessly on the hard bench, edging closer to the fire. But even here in the great hall, warmth is only temporary. The heat reaches your face and chest, yet your back still stiffens with the icy bite drifting in from the walls. You realize that, to survive nights in a castle, you would need more than roaring flames. You would need layers. Thick, scratchy layers that chafe your skin and weigh on your shoulders like burdens. One reality repeated in countless medieval accounts is that clothing itself became a fortress. People bundled themselves in tunics, cloaks, hoods, and hose, sometimes so many that moving gracefully became impossible. Wool was the material of choice, cheap, abundant, and remarkably durable. It trapped air within its fibers, making it one of the few defenses against drafts that swept unhindered through stone chambers. Linen might be worn underneath, softer against the skin, but linen alone was no match for January in a castle. Wool was survival, even if it left you itching through the night. You picture yourself shrugging into a coarse mantle, the fibers rasping against your neck, the smell of lanolin clinging faintly. It isn't pleasant, but it is necessary. Imagine waking to frost on your blanket and your breath curling like smoke in the half-dark. Without those extra layers, you'd shiver endlessly, never truly sleeping. You wonder how anyone managed to rest when comfort meant piling scratchy cloth upon scratchy cloth, until you felt less like a person and more like a bale of wool tied upright. A curious little reminder of medieval ingenuity. Sometimes people stuffed straw or scraps of cloth inside their garments to bulk up insulation. It sounds absurd, like a child padding clothes for mischief, but in desperate cold it was practical. And it worked, at least well enough to keep fingers from stiffening completely. In some households, even dried moss was tucked inside shoes for extra warmth. You try to imagine the crunch under your toes, the strange comfort of grass in winter boots. But layering came at a cost. The more fabric you wore, the heavier and more cumbersome it became. Try climbing the spiral stairs of a castle in 3 tunics, and a cloak that weighs like wet carpet. You'd sweat despite the cold, then freeze again as the damp cloth cooled. Survival was always a balancing act. Too little and you froze, too much and you invited dampness to seep into your bones. Scholars continue to wrestle with the question of whether people valued warmth over mobility or accepted constant motion as the only true heater. You rise from the bench and stroll along the hall. Tapestries ripple faintly in the draught, and you imagine the rustle of wool cloaks brushing together as dozens of residents shuffled past. Servants in thin tunics, nobles in layered finery, children swaddled like tiny parcels, all sharing the same struggle. Clothing was not fashion in winter, it was armor against the unseen enemy. Your hand brushes a cloak hanging from a peg, left by some unseen figure. It feels rough, stiff with old sweat, smelling faintly of smoke. You recoil, then remind yourself that no one expected laundry to be fresh in winter. Washing was difficult, drying nearly impossible, and a wet cloak could freeze solid outdoors. Better to smell of smoke than to risk a layer of ice forming around you. Imagine trying to sleep wrapped in those layers, your skin prickling, body heavy. Did people undress at night? Rarely. To strip down in a freezing castle chamber was to invite misery. More often, you went to bed fully clothed, boots and all, pulling furs or blankets over yourself without removing what you wore during the day. The idea of pajamas, as we know them, would have seemed laughable. Comfort was simply staying alive till morning. A curious side note: some lords boasted of silks or velvets layered atop wool, flaunting wealth even in coldest months. But those fabrics, though beautiful, offered little insulation. In truth, it was the servants, wrapped in humble wool and patched garments, who sometimes endured better. Status could buy luxury, but it could not buy warmth from stone walls. You pause again near the hearth, staring at sparks rising. You shift the weight of your cloak and hood, feel the stifling press of fabric, and you realize how easily clothing defined your world. What you wore determined whether you froze, whether you slept, whether you lived to see spring. It was not vanity, it was survival stitched into every seam. You glance toward the door, where cold still seeps beneath the threshold, curling along the rushes like a slow flood. You tighten your mantle once more, adjusting the itchy collar at your throat. The irritation is constant, but so is the knowledge that without it you would be colder still. Life in a castle demanded this kind of compromise. Comfort sacrificed daily on the altar of necessity. And as you shift your weight, tugging your cloak tighter, you realize that in this world, sleep was not about softness or luxury. It was about endurance. To lie down in layers, stiff and heavy, scratching and reeking of smoke, yet still to close your eyes, that was resilience. And if you managed to dream, you were lucky, because here, in the depths of winter, wrapped like a bundle of woolen rope, the cold was always waiting for you to loosen your grip. You leave the long table behind and drift toward the edge of the hall, where the fire's glow fades into shadow. Beneath your boots, the floor feels uneven, soft in patches, scratchy in others. You glance down and realize it is not bare stone, but a mat of rushes strewn across the ground, mixed with dried herbs, twigs, and unmistakably the damp sheen of spilled ale. The covering crackles faintly when you walk, hiding layers of dirt beneath. One well-attested feature of medieval life is that floors were rarely left exposed. Instead, people scattered bundles of reeds or rushes, sometimes topped with lavender or meadowsweet, both to mask foul smells and to soften the bite of cold stone. To the untrained eye, it looks almost charming, a rustic carpet. But as you scuff your heel, the rushes part to reveal what lies beneath. Crumbs, grease, hair, even the scurry of something alive darting out of sight. So much for charm. The texture beneath your soles is unsettling. At times the stalks cushion your step. At others, they crunch and snap like bones underfoot. You wonder what it must feel like to pad barefoot across them in the middle of the night, skin against damp reeds, cold seeping up from the stone below. Your imagination recoils. Yet you realize many servants and children did exactly that, running shoeless across filthy layers, simply because shoes were too precious to wear indoors. A curious little glimpse of the past. Some households sprinkled mint or chamomile into the rushes, hoping the fragrance would rise when stepped upon. Imagine dozing off in the hall with the faint scent of herbs wafting around you, a medieval attempt at aromatherapy. But the herbs never lasted long. Within weeks, the rushes turned sour, and the sweet smell gave way to something closer to a stable floor. You kneel slightly, plucking a stalk, rolling it between your fingers. It is brittle, shedding fibers that cling to your gloves. How many layers of these mats have been laid here, one upon the other, year after year? Some chroniclers note that in poorly kept castles, rushes might remain for months, even years, before being fully replaced. Beneath them, filth accumulated like a hidden record of daily life. Was this disgusting by modern standards? Absolutely. But to them, it was normal, practical even. Not all historians see eye to eye on how filthy these rushes truly became. Some argue that wealthier households changed them often, making them little worse than a rough carpet. Others insist that the stench was unbearable, noting complaints in old letters about vermin thriving beneath the mats. The truth likely varied. A lord with pride in his hall might order frequent replacement, while a garrison at war might leave the same rushes down until they crumbled into dust. Your boot nudges something small, perhaps a chicken bone, perhaps a piece of pottery long broken and forgotten in the litter. The floor becomes a memory bank, holding relics of feasts, quarrels, spilled wine, laughter, and pests. Rats, of course, loved rushes. They nested in them, hid beneath them, feasted on what was left behind. You imagine lying down to sleep in the hall and feeling something scamper across your blanket. Could you truly rest knowing the floor itself teemed with life? A strange cultural practice surfaces in your thoughts. People sometimes spread new rushes during festivals or holy days as a symbolic cleansing of the hall. Guests entering would smell fresh greenery underfoot, an announcement that celebration was underway. It was more than decoration, it was an attempt to reset the atmosphere, to pretend, if only for a night, that the floor beneath was pure and welcoming. You walk slowly along the wall, listening to the faint rustle your steps make. The sound reminds you of dry grass in late summer, brittle and sharp. Yet here it is the middle of winter, indoors, and instead of sunshine above, there are smoky rafters and drafts crawling down the stones. The disconnect unsettles you. Life inside a castle was never as romantic as tapestries suggest. It was improvisation, herbs to fight stench, reeds to soften stone, fires to fight frost. Always a compromise. You picture a servant sweeping aside old rushes, gagging at the smell, carrying armfuls of damp straw to toss outside. Perhaps snow clung to the new bundles brought in, melting into the floor, making everything briefly wetter and colder before drying again. There was no perfect solution, just endless cycles of laying, trampling, discarding, and replacing. The sensation of the rushes beneath you deepens your awareness. You are never far from the earth in a medieval hall. Even inside towering walls, you still smell soil, straw, animals. Civilization here is not separation from nature, but coexistence with its messiness. To fall asleep on such a floor is to surrender not just to the cold, but to the world's untidiness, its vermin, its smells. As you glance back toward the hearth, you notice how sparks illuminate the floor briefly, making it glitter with bits of husk and herb. For an instant, it seems almost beautiful, like a carpet woven of light. But the illusion fades quickly, leaving only damp reeds and scurrying shadows. You pull your cloak tighter, realizing that here, comfort and filth live side by side, and the price of warmth is often accepting both. And as you take another step, the rushes crunch once more, the sound echoing faintly in the vast hall. You wonder if sleep could ever truly come with that constant awareness beneath you, not a bed of feathers, but a floor that hides more than it reveals. You linger near the fire until hunger begins gnawing at you. The great hall smells faintly of smoke and roasted fat, but the tables are bare now, waiting for the next meal. You can almost hear the echoes of clattering trenchers, knives scraping bone, voices raised over steaming pots. In winter, meals were not just sustenance, they were the closest thing to warmth you could pull into your body. One well-preserved truth is that winter diets revolved around stews, pottages, and thick bread. Meat was salted or smoked, fish was dried, beans and lentils were boiled until they surrendered into mush. The idea wasn't variety, it was fuel. Every mouthful carried the hope of staving off the icy breath that slipped through the walls. A pot hanging over the fire simmered for hours, sometimes days, ingredients tossed in whenever available. The smell of onions, cabbage, or turnips stewing might fill the hall, promising not delicacy but survival. You imagine yourself cupping a wooden bowl in both hands, feeling the rough grain pressing against your palms, the steam rising into your face. The broth is salty, thick, clinging to your lips, warming your chest as it slides down. And yet, almost before you've wiped your mouth, the cold creeps back. It is never gone long. A meal buys you an hour of comfort at most, not a night's sleep. An amusing little side note. Bread itself was often used as both food and plate. Trenchers, carved from stale loaves, caught meat juices, then were eaten or tossed to dogs afterward. Imagine settling down for supper, breaking apart the plate you just ate upon. Strange perhaps, but efficient, and at least it left fewer dishes to wash in icy water. Still, even food could turn against you. Some chroniclers note that ale was safer than water, but drinking too much dulled senses, left you more vulnerable to chill. Strong drink warmed briefly, but then the body cooled faster. A cruel trick of the bloodstream. You might fall asleep pleasantly flushed, only to wake shivering, teeth chattering harder than before. The debate continues among historians as to how much variety winter feasts really offered. Some records describe lavish spreads even in January: roasted boar, pies stuffed with raisins, spiced wine. Others suggest these were rare exceptions, ceremonies meant to display wealth rather than everyday life. For most castle dwellers, the reality was monotony, the same stew ladled from the same pot, day after day, until spring loosened its grip. You picture the servants hunched near the hearth, sipping thin broth from cracked bowls, their bodies crowded close, sharing heat more than food. The noble family at the high table might cut into venison or goose, but down in the shadows the fare was humbler. Hunger equalized more than titles in winter, when all stomachs growled at the same hour of night. The hall holds ghosts of those meals, bones still buried in rushes, grease stains on the long table, a faint sweetness of ale soaked into wood. You can almost hear the clink of knives, the bark of laughter, the rattle of dogs fighting over scraps. Food was never silent here. It was noisy, communal, rough. And after the eating came the long, cold hours, when even full bellies couldn't keep limbs from stiffening. A curious custom flits through your thoughts. Sometimes salt, the great preservative, was piled proudly on the table in gleaming lumps. Its presence was more than culinary, it was symbolic, a sign of wealth and power. But imagine that very salt rubbed into pork or fish, keeping it edible for months, yet also hardening it until chewing was like gnawing leather. Warmth of the stomach came at the price of aching jaws. You find yourself wishing for fruit, for something fresh and bright. Apples stored in cellars might last into winter, wrinkled and soft but still sweet. Perhaps once in a while, someone bit into one, juice running down their chin, and for a moment the bleak hall felt alive with the taste of summer. Such small mercies must have seemed miraculous in the endless dark. You walk past the empty table, tracing grooves carved by knives, and wonder if you would have eaten here, surrounded by noise and warmth, or alone in a chamber with your bowl balanced on your knees. Either way, food was not indulgence, it was armor, a way to buy a little more strength against the encroaching frost. And as your stomach grumbles at the thought, you realize that in a medieval castle, sleep was never divorced from eating. What you consumed determined whether your body could resist the night's cold. To drift into slumber with stew still warm in your veins was to believe, however briefly, that you might endure till morning. The great hall still smells faintly of stewed meat, but another scent lingers too sweet, sour, fermented. Your eyes drift toward the long trestle tables, where wooden pitchers and mugs rest overturned. Drink, after all, was as central to surviving winter nights as the food itself. In a castle where icy draughts slipped freely through stone, where blankets never felt thick enough, ale and weak wine became liquid fire, carried from kitchen to hall in sloshing jugs. It is generally accepted by historians that water was rarely trusted in the Middle Ages, especially within bustling castles where waste and runoff contaminated wells. Fermented drinks, even weak ones, were safer, the alcohol killing off dangerous microbes. A daily ration of ale wasn't indulgence, it was necessity. Children drank it, servants drank it, even knights prepared for patrol with a mug in hand. Yet the warmth it brought was fleeting. You imagine lifting a heavy wooden tankard, its rim rough against your lip, foam clinging to your moustache. The ale is lukewarm, perhaps sour, but it floods your chest with heat. For a few moments, the bite of winter softens. You feel drowsy, shoulders loosening. Could this be the secret to sleep in such a freezing castle? A curious little anecdote: not all ale was equal. Small ale, brewed weak, was consumed in enormous quantities daily, while stronger versions were saved for feasts or celebrations. Some brewers flavoured the drink with herbs like yarrow or bog myrtle, lending bitter or even mildly intoxicating effects. Imagine lying down after a few mugs, the room spinning slightly, the rushes underfoot swaying with you. Sleep would come, but whether restful or not is another matter. You step closer to a pitcher left at the table. Its inside glistens with residue, sticky and sharp-smelling. Wine was rarer in northern castles, but when it appeared, it was often diluted with water or spiced with cinnamon and cloves. The warmth of mulled wine might linger longer than ale, perfuming the breath, tricking the mind into believing the body itself was warmer. Scholars continue to puzzle over the role of drink in medieval sleep. Did people drink deliberately to dull the chill, or was intoxication merely a side effect of social life? Records show both lords pouring goblets late into the night, servants staggering to bed, bellies full of broth and ale. Either way, the cold didn't care. Once the fire burned low, drink-induced warmth vanished, replaced by an even sharper shiver. You think of the guards on night watch, clutching mugs to their lips, stamping their feet in the bailey outside. The alcohol dulled the pain of icy air, but perhaps also made them sluggish, vulnerable. Still, would you choose clarity when your bones rattled from cold? Or would you sip deeply, surrendering wakefulness for even a moment of relief? The table beneath your hands feels sticky, faint traces of honey or wine syrup seeping into grooves. You imagine a feast night, cups spilling, liquid dripping into the rushes, leaving sweet smells to attract vermin later. Drink warmed the body, yes, but it also fed pests, soaked floors, and left stains that endured long after laughter faded. Stranger still, some medieval households believed that wine taken before bed encouraged prophetic dreams. Priests warned against drunkenness, but others whispered that visions came easier after a cup or two. Did castle residents wake from strange night terrors and blame the spiced wine rather than the cold seeping into their bones? You tilt your head back, picturing yourself after a night of steady drinking. The hall grows louder in your imagination: laughter, slamming fists, slurred songs. At last, the fire burns low, the torches gutter, and one by one bodies slump onto benches or into straw beds. Some snore heavily, others mutter in half-dream. For a few hours, perhaps they escape the cold, cocooned in the haze of alcohol. But morning arrives, and their heads pound as the frost still clings to the rafters. The question lingers as you step away from the table. Could you truly rely on drink to make these stone nights tolerable? Perhaps for a while. Yet even as the warmth fades from your chest, you sense the truth. Ale and wine are only masks. The cold always waits, patient and merciless, ready to remind you that comfort here is fleeting, and sleep, no matter how deep, is always shared with frost. You leave the hall, climbing the narrow staircase that spirals upward into darkness. The fire's warmth dwindles behind you, replaced by the whisper of cold air rising like a phantom through the stairwell. Your hand clings to the stone wall for balance, but the surface is slick with condensation, and the chill passes straight through your glove into your palm. Step by step, you ascend toward the upper chambers, the very rooms where the Lord and Lady once lay their heads, the supposed pinnacle of comfort inside these walls. It is generally acknowledged in castle studies that the higher you went, the colder it became. Heat rose, yes, but so did drafts, swirling through thin windows and ill-fitting shutters. On the ground floor, kitchens and animals provided at least a hint of body warmth. Upstairs, chambers were silent, lofty, and bitter. The cold seeped into your bones more stealthily there, and the silence seemed to magnify it. You pause midway, breath fogging before your eyes. The stair is so tight you could touch both sides with outstretched arms, yet still the draught twists upward like smoke. You imagine children running here with bare feet, servants staggering under blankets or trays of food, each step an echo in the spiral. Did they ever envy those who slept below, closer to the hearths? Or did they see the chambers above as a privilege, frost and all? An odd detail from some records. Bedding was sometimes carried to chambers still warm from the kitchen fire, blankets wrapped in bundles that had absorbed heat from ovens. Families would then hurry upstairs, racing the warmth before it faded. Imagine clutching a half-warm sheet against your chest, running breathless up these stairs, only to find it chilled again before you laid it on the bed. You emerge at last into a corridor lined with doors. The air here is sharper, less forgiving, as though the wind itself has free rein. Even the flicker of torches looks weaker, their light dulled by the draught. You tighten your cloak and walk slowly along, noting how the doors themselves gape slightly, frames warped over centuries. Scholars continue to debate whether upper chambers were ever truly private. Some argue they were sanctuaries for lords, filled with furs and silks, while others point out that servants often shared space nearby, ready to stoke fires or fetch chamber pots. Privacy in medieval terms rarely matched our modern imagination. To sleep upstairs was not to retreat alone, but to exist within layers of service and ceremony, even while shivering under covers. Your fingers trace the edge of a door, feeling the rough grain, splinters catching at your skin. You press your ear against the wood and hear only silence, the muffled heartbeat of a sleeping castle. You push gently, and the door creaks open. Inside, the chamber is larger than you expected, yet barren by modern standards. A single bed frame looms against the far wall, draped with curtains. A chest squats at its foot, iron-banded, unyielding. A narrow window gapes open to the night, covered only by a wooden shutter that rattles faintly. The air is so sharp you taste it, metallic and raw. A curious custom once practiced. Nobles sometimes had their beds placed not against the wall but toward the center of the chamber, so the cold stone would radiate less into their backs. Curtains around the bed weren't merely decoration, they were barriers, trapping whatever warmth your own body could produce. Yet even so, many letters and chronicles mention frost forming on the inside of those curtains by morning, a lace of ice framing the sleeper. You step closer to the bed, pulling the curtains slightly aside. The straw mattress bulges unevenly, stuffed too loosely in places, too tightly in others. A blanket lies folded at the corner, stiff with age. You press your hand into the straw and feel the poking ends, the dry crackle. Could you sleep here, with straw scratching your back, with draughts sneaking through every seam? Not all historians agree on how often upper chambers were heated. Some claim braziers of coal were used, filling the air with acrid smoke, while others insist such fires were dangerous and rare. Either way, standing in this chamber now, you believe the second argument. There is no warmth here, only the illusion of comfort in heavy curtains and high beds. You imagine yourself lying in this bed, cloak still wrapped around you, hood pulled low. Outside, the shutter bangs faintly in the wind. Inside, your breath fogs and curls, leaving a wet patch on the blanket where it falls. Each shift of your body makes the straw crunch, each movement reminding you that sleep will come only as exhaustion, never as ease. And yet, you sense the strange dignity that lingered here. This was the Lord's chamber, after all, a place of ceremony as well as rest. The bed was a symbol, an emblem of authority, even if its occupant shivered through the night. In this paradox lies the essence of castle life: grandeur that could not hide the cold, power that could not command warmth. As you pull the curtain shut again, leaving the bed to its shadows, you realize that the climb upstairs offered no sanctuary. It was merely another layer of the same struggle. Whether below in the hall or above in the chambers, the question never changed. Could you truly close your eyes against such relentless chill? You pause just inside the chamber, your eyes drawn again to that bed. At first glance, it looks almost luxurious compared to the rush-strewn floor below. A frame of oak, tall posts at each corner, curtains draped like the folds of a theatre stage. Yet as you step closer, you realize this was not simply decoration. It was a strategy, a shield, a kind of tent within the room. Chroniclers from the 15th century often mention hung beds, draped on all sides, sometimes with heavy cloth or even layers of animal skins. The purpose was simple: to trap the small bubble of warmth generated by the sleeper's body and breath. A chamber might be freezing, but inside that curtained cocoon, the air could be a little less hostile. The curtains muffled drafts, dimmed torchlight, and provided a fragile illusion of privacy. They were, in a way, medieval sleeping bags on a wooden frame. You draw the fabric aside. It is thick, embroidered with a faded pattern that once gleamed bright but now feels heavy with soot. Your fingers sink into it, scratching slightly, the threads rough against your skin. Inside, the bed smells faintly of straw, sweat, and smoke. You sit down carefully, the frame creaking under your weight, and the straw-stuffed mattress rustles beneath you. One strange yet telling detail: in some households, bed curtains were not only for warmth but for status. Visitors could tell at a glance who slept with wealth, who with poverty. To have thick, coloured drapery around your bed was to announce both dignity and defence, and so what kept you alive in winter also became what set you apart. But even here, discomfort persisted. The straw pokes through the coarse sheets, scratching your palm. A quilt lies folded nearby, stiff with age, stitched from scraps of cloth in uneven patches. You pull it over your lap, and though heavy, it holds no real warmth until your own body heat seeps into it. Imagine trying to drift into sleep under such a weight, waiting for the chill to ease, every exhale fogging the inside of the curtains. A lingering historical debate concerns just how effective these curtains were. Some argue they worked well, making a small enclosed chamber far warmer than the surrounding room. Others point out that moisture from breath froze along the fabric, turning it stiff and icy by morning, reducing the comfort they offered. Your own imagination tells you both could be true: warm at first, then clammy and rimed with frost when dawn crept in. An odd and amusing tidbit surfaces. Children sometimes played games inside the curtained beds, pretending they were forts or boats, vanishing into the folds to hide from adults. For them, the curtains weren't just protection from cold but the stuff of imagination. To you now, though, it feels more like a cave, narrow, airless, an enclosure that both comforts and stifles. You lie back for a moment, staring up at the canopy. Shadows flicker there as the torch outside the curtain sputters. The posts creak faintly, as though whispering with age. Your body rests awkwardly on lumps of straw, each movement making a faint crunch. This is no feather mattress. Only the wealthiest households could afford feather beds, and even those often leaked quills, pricking sleepers through the sheets. You wonder whether the Lord here cursed as much as you do now, shifting, scratching, sighing into the cold. The curtain sways slightly in a draught that sneaks beneath. A strand brushes your cheek, cool and damp. You realize how porous this barrier really is. Yes, it slows the cold, but it never defeats it. To sleep here would be to accept compromise once more. Comfort in fragments, never whole. Imagine waking in the middle of the night. The fire downstairs is nearly out. The castle hushed except for the creak of beams in the frost. You reach up, pull the curtain closer, listen to the wind whistle against the shutter. Your breath fogs so thickly it hangs inside the enclosure like a ghost. You turn, pressing your face into the blanket, trying to block out the icy sting. This is what luxury meant inside a medieval castle. Not warmth, not softness, but a fragile bubble that bought you a little time against the inevitable. As you sit up again, pulling the curtain aside, you can almost hear voices from centuries past. Servants whispering as they stoked embers in the brazier, children whimpering in their beds nearby, a lord muttering a prayer that spring would come quickly. The curtain closes, and silence swallows them all. You step away from the bed, glancing back one last time. The posts stand tall, defiant, the drapery hanging heavy, a monument to human ingenuity and limitation both. It was clever, yes, but not foolproof. You shake your head softly, cloak tight around your shoulders, realizing that even inside this most privileged chamber, the same question lingers. Could you truly rest, night after night, when frost waits patiently at the edge of your dreams? You stand beside the curtained bed a moment longer, then let your gaze wander downward. Beneath the quilt, beneath the linen sheets, there lies the true foundation of the bed, the mattress. To modern eyes it might look inviting, but as you press your palm into the surface, you feel the uneven lumps and prickles of straw packed inside. It crunches softly, shifting like dry leaves, and when you push harder, the stalks jab through the fabric and scratch your skin. Contemporary records often describe these mattresses as sacks of straw or pallets, stuffed not just with straw but sometimes with reeds, rushes, or even chaff left from threshing grain. Such fillings were plentiful, cheap, and easy to replace. Comfort was never the point, availability was. To sleep on straw was to accept its quirks, the sound of it rustling each time you rolled over, the itch of stalks poking through, the way it flattened into hard mats after only a few weeks. You lower yourself onto the mattress. The first impression is oddly springy, almost pleasant, but within seconds, sharp ends prod at your thigh, and dust rises, tickling your nose. You sneeze, and the sound echoes in the stillness of the chamber. Imagine trying to rest here, your body itching, your breathing clogged by particles of straw and chaff. Yet for countless castle residents, this was the nightly routine. An amusing little note appears in some medieval housekeeping manuals. It was advised to change the straw in mattresses every few months to keep vermin away. Realistically, that meant hauling out the old, infested filling and replacing it with fresh stalks from the fields. Servants performed this task, shaking out the sacks, chasing away fleas, perhaps muttering curses under their breath. You picture them staggering upstairs with bundles of dry straw, stuffing the bed until it bulged, only for the comfort to last a short while before collapsing flat again. Debates among historians linger over how widely feather mattresses were used in castles. Some argue that only the wealthiest nobles could afford feathers in large enough quantity, and even then, quills poked mercilessly through. Others suggest that feathers became more common in later centuries, prized not just for softness but for warmth. Whichever the case, you are not lying on feathers tonight. You are lying on straw, scratching and sneezing, wondering how anyone managed to dream in such a nest. A curious custom sometimes attached to straw beds was the layering of herbs within them. Lavender, wormwood, or pennyroyal meant to repel insects and add fragrance. The scent might lull you briefly, but by morning it would mingle with the musty odor of damp straw, producing an aroma that was anything but calming. Still, People clung to these traditions, believing herbs carried protective powers against both vermin and evil spirits. You shift on the mattress, listening to the steady crunch beneath you. Each sound seems too loud in the silence of the chamber, as if the bed itself complains at your restlessness. You imagine a sleepless night filled with nothing but the rasp of straw against fabric, the faint scuttle of something small moving within. Could you find peace in such a place? Or would your nerves fray with every whisper from beneath your body? One undeniable reality is that beds were often shared. Families, servants, even guests might pile into the same mattress for warmth. The straw flattened faster under so many bodies, becoming hard and uneven. Yet the closeness of others, their body heat, their breathing, was another form of insulation. You picture 3 or 4 figures huddled here, limbs tangled, straw squeaking beneath them, their combined warmth perhaps enough to make the night bearable. Solitude, after all, was colder than company. You press your hand harder into the mattress and feel how the filling has shifted, clumped into ridges. Somewhere near the center, the fabric is worn thin, and a stalk jabs through sharply. You pull your hand back, frowning, then chuckle softly. Even discomfort becomes normal when repeated every night. People accepted scratches, sneezes, the occasional flea bite, because the alternative bare stone was worse. As you rise from the bed, brushing bits of straw from your cloak, you realize that this mattress is a metaphor for castle life itself. Practical, makeshift, never comfortable but always sufficient. To live here was to adapt constantly, to lower your expectations until the scratch of straw felt tolerable. You glance back once more, imagining a lord reclining stiffly upon it, curtains drawn, straw crunching beneath, servants hovering nearby. Power didn't buy freedom from the cold or from the prickling of stalks against skin. Even the mighty, it seems, slept uneasily. And as you step away from the bed, you wonder again. Would you, after long days in such a castle, ever truly rest? Or would every night be a negotiation between your body and the stubborn, rustling straw? You move from the straw mattress, still brushing tiny splinters of stalk from your cloak, and your eyes drift toward a heap folded neatly across a wooden chest. Furs. Thick, dark, and heavy, they spill over the edge like frozen waves. Compared to straw and wool, they look almost regal, a promise of luxury amid the drafts. You step closer and run your hand along the top layer. The surface is coarse, the guard hairs prickly under your palm, but beneath that lies softness, dense and warm. Contemporary accounts confirm that animal hides were among the most valued possessions in northern castles. Deer, bear, wolf, and fox pelts lined beds and cloaks, offering insulation far stronger than woven cloth. For a family of means, stacking furs in winter was as essential as stacking firewood. They weren't merely decoration, they were survival stitched into skin. To have a pile of furs was to hold the warmth of the forest in your chamber. You lift one, draping it over your shoulders. Its weight is immediate, pressing you down, enveloping you. At first, you feel smothered, but then the warmth begins to seep in, slow but undeniable. The smell rises with it, a musky tang, earthy and faintly sour, like soil and smoke blended together. You realize that sleeping beneath furs was not like slipping into fresh linen. It was to carry the scent of the hunt into bed, the reminder of wildness clinging to you, even in slumber. A curious little practice sometimes mentioned in letters. Nobles occasionally perfumed their furs with lavender water or rose oil, trying to mask the natural musk. Imagine lying down to sleep beneath a bear hide that smelled faintly of roses. A strange marriage of wilderness and luxury, of raw necessity and cultivated refinement. Perhaps it comforted some, though the fragrance must have faded quickly in the damp air of winter. But not everyone enjoyed such bounty. Scholars remain divided over how widely furs were used beyond the nobility. Some argue that hides were abundant enough in certain regions for common households to use them freely. Others insist that servants made do with coarse wool and patched blankets, leaving the best pelts to lords and ladies. Either way, Furs became symbols of wealth, of survival, and of the blurred line between the two. You picture the bed again, now layered with these heavy skins. A body slipping under them would vanish from sight, swallowed by folds of fur. The warmth would be immediate compared to bare wool, yet the heaviness could feel suffocating. Did sleepers dream of forests, of hunts, of animals breathing in the night? Did they ever wake with a start, mistaking the weight on their chest for the beast itself pressing down? The sound of the wind rattles the shutter, and you pull the fur closer around your shoulders. It works, your breath feels warmer already, your fingers less stiff. But the price is movement. To turn beneath such weight would be an effort, each shift resisted by thick hides pressing you flat. Comfort was a trade, warmth for freedom. And in a world where frostbite lurked, warmth always won. Another oddity surfaces. Inventories of noble households sometimes list furs alongside jewels and weapons, catalogued with equal reverence. They were wealth, status, dowries. Brides carried them to new households. Lords gave them as gifts to cement alliances. Imagine being handed a fox pelt as a sign of political trust, your fingers brushing the fur as though shaking hands with the beast itself. You spread the fur out across the bed, watching how the firelight glints on its glossy hairs. For a moment, the room feels less hostile. You could almost imagine yourself lying down, curtains drawn, straw poking through beneath but hidden under layers of animal warmth. Almost. Then a draft slips through the shutter, swirling across your cheek, and you remember how little separates you from the night outside. The reality, of course, is that no amount of fur could fully silence the cold. At best, they delayed it, creating a temporary cocoon. By morning, the stone walls reclaimed the air, chilling even the densest hides. People adapted, they piled more on, huddled closer together, prayed for dawn, and still, frost clung to the rafters, mocking their efforts. You run your hand over the pelt one last time, feeling the paradox of it. Nature's gift and burden, warmth and weight, luxury and necessity. In these chambers, every item told the same story: cleverness meeting limitation. Furs helped, yes, but did they guarantee restful sleep on the coldest night? The shiver in your spine answers for you. They softened the battle, but the war with winter never ended. You step back from the heap of furs, feeling their weight linger on your shoulders even after you've shrugged them off. The chamber is silent, but for the faint whistle of the wind through the shutter, a sound that reminds you of another nightly ordeal. Sleep is never uninterrupted in a castle like this. At some point, inevitably, your body stirs with a different need, the kind no curtain or fur can postpone. You glance toward a corner of the chamber where a humble, practical object waits: the chamber pot. Records from noble households make it clear that privacy was limited, but chamber pots were nearly universal. They were simple, ceramic or metal vessels, tucked discreetly under beds or beside chests. At night, when icy corridors stretched between you and the Guarderobe, the draughty latrine that emptied into the moat, this pot was your only salvation. Better to stumble across the room half asleep than to brave a freezing stairwell where one slip could leave you sprawled in the dark. You cross the chamber and lift the pot by its handle. The clay is cold, your fingers stinging where they touch it. It's not glamorous, not pleasant, but it is survival. Imagine yourself on a winter night, half buried in straw and furs, feeling the pressure in your bladder, dreading the choice. Would you drag yourself through shadowed corridors, risking draughts that cut like knives? Or would you fumble for this pot, clumsy in the dark, hoping not to spill a drop on already filthy rushes? A curious little fact: wealthier families sometimes had their chamber pots lined with cloth or filled with straw to dampen sound and splash. Servants, of course, dealt with the aftermath. By morning, they carried the reeking contents down to dump into pits or streams, sometimes while gagging or muttering about their master's nightly habits. Few jobs in a castle were as dreaded, and yet someone had to do it, every single day. Scholarly opinion differs on how common it was for people to leave the pot until morning. Some argue that odours were so overwhelming that emptying had to happen at night, even in freezing dark. Others suggest the stench was simply endured, the pot shoved beneath a bed curtain until dawn. Neither version is appealing to your imagination. The air in this chamber is already damp and sharp. Add the sour tang of human waste, and luxury becomes a cruel word. You set the pot down and picture a servant entering quietly before dawn, shoulders hunched, carrying the vessel carefully. Perhaps he or she thought bitterly of lords snoring under warm furs while they carried the stink outside in the cold. The unseen labour of night, invisible to those in the curtained bed, was constant and essential. Without it, the chamber would be unbearable by morning. And if you were unlucky, if you happened to be a guard sleeping in a cramped room with many others, there might be only one pot for all. The rushes soaked up more than spilled ale in those cases, and the smell, once embedded, never truly left. An odd belief sometimes surfaces in old texts. People thought night air itself was unhealthy, full of miasmas that caused sickness. To step outside to the latrine was not just uncomfortable but dangerous, exposing lungs to poisoned air. In that context, the chamber pot was not just convenience, it was protection, a way to avoid the dreaded night vapors that might shorten your life. You sit again on the edge of the bed, glancing toward the corner where the pot waits, silent and unglamorous. It sums up castle life perfectly. Survival hinged not on grandeur, but on small practical tools, and on servants who bore the burden of cleaning them. Could you sleep knowing that, at any moment, you might be forced to stumble from warmth into that ritual, the cold rushing in around you as you struggled in the dark? The question lingers as you pull your cloak tighter. Sleep, you realize, was never pure rest in a castle. It was fragmented, interrupted by necessity, shadowed by discomforts both grand and petty. And even when you tried to ignore them, the pot in the corner whispered a reminder. In this stone fortress, even nature's simplest needs became nightly battles. You leave the bedchamber for a moment, following the tug of cold air toward the narrow window on the far side of the corridor. At first glance, it looks like an open wound in the wall, an arrow slit widened into a square. The shutter that should cover it rattles faintly in the wind, wooden boards swollen and warped from centuries of rain and frost. You step closer and press your hand against the surface. The wood is clammy, as if it has absorbed the night itself. Contemporary accounts describe these shutters as the simplest form of insulation castles had to offer. Glass was rare and costly, and even when used it was thick, bubbled and poor at keeping out draughts. Most castles relied on hinged planks of oak or pine. They creaked loudly when opened, leaked air when closed, and demanded constant repairs. Still, they were better than nothing, and without them, the upper chambers would have been unbearable. You tug lightly at the iron latch, and the shutter groans as it moves. A blast of icy air smacks your face, and you stagger back, eyes watering. Outside, the night stretches endless, snow drifting down in soft sheets, the moon caught in patches of cloud. For a heartbeat, the view is breathtaking silvered roofs, the dark moat frozen like black glass. Then the chill claws straight through your cloak, and the beauty feels like cruelty. You slam the shutter back into place, the wood trembling against the stone frame. One quirky habit from the period: some households stuffed straw, cloth, or even animal dung into gaps around shutters to block the wind. It must have looked crude, but the goal was warmth, not elegance. Imagine tucking moss into cracks by candlelight, fingers numb, praying it would hold till morning. You smile grimly, realizing the drafts still found their way in, curling along the floor like sly animals. There's still debate among architectural historians about how much these shutters actually helped. Some argue they provided decent insulation when well fitted, while others claim they barely made a difference against gales sweeping across the battlements. Standing here, your cheeks still stinging from the brief gust, you're inclined to side with the skeptics. This shutter feels more symbolic than effective, a fragile gesture against an enemy too vast to be stopped. You lean closer, ear pressed to the seam, and hear the faint whistle of wind slipping through. Each sound is like a whisper, a reminder that you are never sealed away. Stone may keep armies at bay, but winter requires no siege ladders. It seeps in, subtle and endless. Imagine lying in bed with that constant hiss at your ear, the noise reminding you of the world's indifference. A curious record survives of nobles boasting about coloured shutters painted with crests or designs, as if decoration could disguise the draught. But paint didn't keep out cold any better than plain wood. Perhaps it was more about pride, showing guests that even discomfort could be ornamented. You picture a visitor admiring the crest while secretly shivering beneath their cloak. You rest your forehead briefly against the plank. It is cold, almost wet. How many children pressed their noses here, staring out at snow, while their parents muttered about the chill? How many servants cursed when the latch froze shut, leaving them to wrestle with it in the night? The shutter, humble as it seems, was part of every winter routine. Another oddity. In some regions, shutters were lined with parchment or cloth soaked in oil, an attempt to stiffen them against wind and moisture. It worked briefly but tore easily. Imagine the frustration: patching, mending, always improvising, never winning. Life inside these walls was not about defeating the cold, only delaying it. You step back, letting the shutter rattle again. The sound is steady now, like a heartbeat in wood. It will echo through the night, punctuating silence with its groan. Could you sleep with that rhythm in your ears? Perhaps exhaustion dulled it eventually. Or perhaps you would dream of knocking and creaking until dawn, the castle itself groaning with you. As you pull your cloak tight and turn away, you realize this shutter is more than wood and hinges. It is a symbol of the castle's paradox: mighty against men, feeble against nature. You could close it, bar it, decorate it, but never truly silence what lay beyond. And so, in every chamber, with every rattling board, the question repeats itself: can you rest when the cold insists on knocking even through the walls? You step down from the lordly chamber, winding your way along another spiral stair that tightens like a corkscrew. The air grows damper as you descend, the draught stronger with every step, until you find yourself in the part of the castle reserved not for nobility, but for those who served them, the servants' quarters. One widely acknowledged reality is that the lower floors were often crowded with workers who kept the castle alive. Cooks, laundresses, pages, grooms, guards off duty. Unlike the lord's room with its curtains and furs, their sleeping spaces were meagre, bare, and close to the earth. The cold here doesn't just creep, it clings. You inhale, and the air feels heavier, tinged with the smell of sweat, straw, and smoke carried down from the kitchens. You duck beneath a low arch into a chamber lined with rough pallets. The rushes here are thinner, the straw already crushed flat under constant use. Blankets are scarce, little more than woolen scraps patched together. Some are ragged cloaks repurposed at night, stiff with grime. The weight of bodies fills the space with warmth during busy nights. But now, empty, the chill feels merciless. An unusual but revealing tidbit. In some castles, servants actually slept in the kitchens themselves, curling near the great ovens to steal warmth. The smell of bread and ash clung to them, but at least the heat was real. Here, away from the fire, you feel no such blessing. Just the scrape of wind through gaps in the walls and the sound of your own breath fogging. You crouch near one of the pallets, running your hand over its surface. Coarse wool blankets itch even through your gloves, and when you press down, the straw underneath crunches sharply. Imagine ending a day of endless labor, hauling water, scrubbing rushes, tending animals only to collapse onto this thin layer, body aching, teeth still chattering. Sleep here would not come easily. It would come as surrender. There's still uncertainty among historians about whether servants had any bedding at all beyond straw. Some records suggest they slept directly on the floor, huddled in cloaks, while others describe basic pallets provided in larger households. The truth, as so often, probably depended on the wealth of the castle and the luck of the servant. But one thing is certain: Comfort was a luxury reserved for those upstairs. You glance around the room and see how tightly the pallets are arranged. Elbow to elbow, knee to knee. People must have lain here like sardines, not out of choice but necessity. And yet that closeness carried an advantage. Shared body heat. In the absence of thick blankets or roaring fires, warmth came from proximity. You imagine the sound of dozens of breaths, the shuffle of limbs, snores and sighs weaving together into a ragged lullaby. Did they mind the closeness? Or was it simply another fact of life, endured without thought? A curious belief recorded in folk tradition. Some people swore that sleeping too close together allowed illnesses to spread faster, while others believed the opposite, that crowding together warded off fevers by keeping the body warm. The debate never fully settled, but either way, servants had no choice. Their lives depended on duty, not preference. You sit for a moment on one of the pallets, feeling the cold rise up from the stone beneath. Even with layers of straw, the dampness creeps through. Your mind drifts to a servant lying here, perhaps dreaming of the kitchen fire upstairs or the warmth of a stolen fur. For them, sleep must have been less about comfort and more about collapsing into unconsciousness after exhaustion. You notice a small wooden chest in the corner, its lid warped. Inside, scraps of fabric and maybe a patched tunic are visible. No silk, no velvet, only rough homespun. Clothing doubled as bedding here. Garments pulled tight around bodies at night, every stitch doing double duty. Nothing was wasted. Everything was bent toward the simple question of survival. The smell here is different from the Lord's chamber. Earthier, saltier, layered with humanity. Sweat from long days of labor, grease from meals eaten hastily, smoke from torches carried through corridors. And yet, in a strange way, it feels more honest. This was where the real work of the castle lived, where people carried burdens unseen, and where sleep, however fragile, kept them going. You rise again, pulling your cloak tighter, and let the image sink in. Dozens of servants, teeth chattering, feet pressed together, shoulders touching, all wrapped in ragged blankets. The lord above might have furs and curtains, but his comfort depended on the shivering figures here below. Without them, fires would go unlit, meals uncooked, shutters unrepaired. The castle's strength was built on their weary backs. And as you leave the chamber, stepping once more into the cold corridor, you ask yourself, would you rather endure the draughty grandeur of the Lord's room, or the crowded misery of the servants' hall? Either way, winter would find you. Sleep, when it came, would be a hard bargain struck with discomfort. You leave the servants' quarters behind, but the echo of their crowded breathing lingers in your imagination. As you ascend a smaller stair, your ears catch something softer than the creak of timbers or the whistle of wind, a faint hum, the sound of small voices carried through the stone. You follow it to a chamber tucked along the corridor, a nursery. It is well known from medieval records that noble children rarely slept in their parents' chambers. They were housed in separate rooms, sometimes overseen by a nursemaid, sometimes clustered together with siblings or cousins. These nurseries were meant to keep order, to train children in discipline early. Yet here, in the heart of winter, the separation also meant vulnerability. The cold reached them just as ruthlessly as any adult, and their small bodies had fewer defenses. You step into the room. It is smaller than the grand chamber above, but still draughty, the air tinged with smoke from torches outside. Tiny pallets line the wall's simple frames with straw mattresses like those in the servants' hall, though topped with small woolen blankets, faded and thin. You imagine children huddled together beneath them, their breath puffing like smoke signals into the night. The thought is both tender and tragic. A curious little detail preserved in household accounts. Children often slept 2 or 3 to a bed, not just for space but for warmth. Their bodies pressed together, sharing heat instinctively. A nursemaid might lie nearby, wrapped in her own cloak, listening for whimpers in the dark. The sound of lullabies must have filled this room once. voices soft and steady, an attempt to drown out the rattle of shutters and the scrape of frost against stone. Not all scholars agree on how well these nurseries were heated. Some argue that small fireplaces were built into such chambers in wealthier castles, giving the children at least a chance against the night. Others suggest they relied solely on body heat, their fires too precious to waste on little ones. Either way, standing here now, you feel no trace of warmth in the air, only the silence, deep and brittle, like glass waiting to shatter. You crouch by one of the tiny beds. The blanket is rough, patched from scraps of older cloth, stitched hastily by hands that knew necessity better than artistry. You lift it and find it stiff, smelling faintly of lanolin. Beneath, the straw mattress crunches as you press down, the sound echoing in the chamber like a sigh. Imagine a child tossing here, itchy from stalks, shivering beneath thin cloth, trying to curl into a ball to conserve heat. An odd belief once whispered in rural households. Children who slept too warmly would grow weak, while those accustomed to cold became strong. Perhaps such sayings were born from necessity, excuses for thin bedding and draughty rooms. But you wonder how many fevers, how many shivers were endured in silence under that philosophy. You walk slowly across the room, your boots scuffing the floor. In the corner stands a wooden cradle, its rockers worn smooth. You give it a slight push, and it creaks forward and back, the sound oddly mournful. Inside, a wool-stuffed cushion lies flat. You picture an infant bundled in swaddling bands, arms pinned, body stiff, face peeking out while cold air brushed against fragile skin. How many nights did nursemaids pace this floor, whispering prayers that the baby would last till spring? The nursery also carried noise of a different kind. Children whispering stories, giggling under blankets, or crying when the draughts were too sharp. Their voices would have woven into the soundtrack of the castle night. Sleep here was not silence but shared chaos, muffled into something like comfort by the mere presence of others. A curious custom. Some families hung charms or religious tokens above children's beds, hoping to ward off night spirits thought to roam draughty halls. Bells, beads, even small bones were tied to string, clinking softly when the wind shifted. Whether protection worked or not, the sound of such trinkets must have blended strangely with the creak of shutters and the sigh of straw. You pause, closing your eyes. You can almost hear it now. The restless shuffle of little bodies, the hum of a lullaby, the faint rattle of charms above. And beneath it all, the steady drumbeat of cold pressing through stone. These children, heirs to titles and lands, slept no more soundly than the servants below. In the end, everyone in this fortress was equal under winter's rule. You open your eyes again and glance around the room. It feels emptier now, but the ghosts of its occupants linger. You see them curling together, noses red, eyes fluttering shut despite the cold. Did they dream of summer fields, or of endless nights like this? Did they ever wake in terror, mistaking the moan of the wind for a monster in the dark? Perhaps the true monster was always the cold itself. And as you step back into the corridor, pulling your cloak tighter, the question follows you: could you have slept here as a child, wrapped in thin wool, the draught licking your cheek? Would you have found solace in the company of siblings, or would the cold have carved its way into every dream? You step away from the nursery, the echo of children's whispers fading behind the heavy wooden door. The corridor stretches ahead, torchlight flickering in iron brackets, each flame sputtering in the draught. You notice how thin the light is, how quickly it wavers, as though uncertain it can survive here any more than you. Candles and torches, these are the heartbeat of a castle after dark, fragile and finite. Without them, the night swallows everything whole. One reality echoed in countless records is that candles were a prized commodity. Tallow was cheap but smoky and foul-smelling, leaving behind greasy soot. Beeswax, sweet and clean, was costly and often reserved for chapels or noble chambers. The rest of the castle lived by the weaker glow of tallow or flickering resinous torches. These lights burned fast, uneven, and always left you wondering when the flame would gutter out. You pause beside one candle resting on a crude iron holder. Its flame bends in the draught, shrinking low, then flaring tall, shadows shifting with it. The wax has dripped down in rivulets, hardened into stalactites along the base. You lift your hand and feel almost no heat, only the faintest trace of warmth. The light, not the heat, was what mattered. And even that was unreliable. Imagine lying in bed, eyes fixed on a single candle, praying it would last the night so you wouldn't wake in absolute darkness. An unusual but memorable detail. Some households reused every drop of wax, scraping hardened drips from holders, melting them down to form new candles. Servants spent hours collecting, remolding, and trimming wicks. Even so, light was never abundant. The castle at night was dim, smoky, punctuated by small, glowing islands in vast seas of shadow. Historians continue to debate just how dark medieval interiors truly were. Some argue that with constant fires, torches, and candles, halls could be bright enough to conduct business even after sunset. Others suggest that for most residents, the night was nearly impenetrable, with only a few key spaces illuminated. Standing here, watching the candle flame tremble, you believe the latter. Light feels precious, fleeting, and darkness presses on every side. You step further down the corridor. The torches hiss as drops of resin drip onto the floor, the smell sharp and tar-like. Smoke clings to the air, catching in your throat. You cough softly, and the sound feels loud, almost intrusive in the quiet. The air itself tastes burned, bitter on your tongue. To live here was to inhale smoke every day, lungs blackened not by industry but by survival's fire. A curious little superstition once attached itself to candles. Some believed that if a flame sputtered or bent suddenly, it meant spirits had entered the room. Imagine the unease already surrounded by shadow, already cold, and now you see your candle dance strangely. Was it the draught? Or something unseen breathing beside you? Either explanation would have made sleep harder to claim. You recall too that candles were often rationed. In some castles, only the lord's chambers and the great hall enjoyed light after hours. Servants, once finished with their duties, slipped into bed in near total darkness. The day's labor ended not by choice but by extinguishing flame. What would it feel like to crawl into straw with only memory of light, the dark pressing heavy on your eyes? You stop beneath a high arch where a torch burns low. Its flame is small, but it throws tall shadows across the stones, shapes that stretch like silent figures. You shift uneasily, aware of how easy it would be to mistake these shadows for intruders, or for creatures conjured by an anxious mind. How many nights did castle dwellers lie awake, staring at shadows flickering on curtains, listening for sounds that might not exist? Another oddity. Candle stubs were valuable enough to be gifts. A servant might receive leftover bits of wax from a noble table, treasured as much as bread. These fragments meant an extra hour of light at home, a chance to sew or pray or simply feel less afraid. It speaks volumes that even in stone fortresses, light was as precious as coin. You reach the end of the corridor and glance back. Flames line the walls, but they look small against the vastness of stone. Each one sputters, bends, flares, then threatens to die. You realize that to sleep in a castle was to do so with constant awareness that light might vanish at any moment. And when it did, darkness wasn't passive, it was alive, pressing close, hiding everything from sight. Imagine lying in bed, hearing the last candle sputter. The room plunges into blackness so complete you can't see your own hand. You breathe louder, trying to assure yourself you're still here. Every creak, every sigh of the wind feels magnified. Perhaps you whisper a prayer, or perhaps you squeeze your eyes shut, convincing yourself the dark will be gone by morning. As you turn into another chamber, the candle nearest you flickers and dies. The wick smokes faintly, twisting upward before vanishing. The sudden loss of light makes the cold feel sharper. You realize again how fragile comfort was in these walls. Warmth fading, light sputtering, always borrowed, never owned. And you wonder, could you ever rest deeply in such a place, when the night itself seems intent on reminding you how small your defenses truly are? The last candle's smoke still curls upward in your imagination as you move cautiously through the corridor. The air feels heavier now, the darkness thicker. Yet, faintly, you hear something cutting through it, the toll of a bell. Slow, deliberate, the sound seems to drip from the rafters, vibrating in your chest. It marks not midnight as you might expect, but dawn. Morning has come, though the hall still feels wrapped in night. It is widely accepted that bells regulated nearly every rhythm of medieval life. They marked the hours of prayer, the call to meals, the beginning of labor, and in winter, when the sun rose late and lingered little, bells reminded everyone that morning had arrived, even if the sky outside still glowed faintly grey. Inside the castle, you might wake to the clangor echoing off stone long before you saw a glimmer of sunlight through a shutter. You picture yourself in a curtained bed, stirring at the sound. Your breath hangs visibly in the cold air, your limbs stiff from hours of restless shivering. The bell offers no warmth, it simply insists that sleep is over. You push back the furs, each movement a negotiation with the cold. Every step to the floor feels like plunging your feet into an icy stream. A curious little observation from monastic chronicles. Some bells were rung with extra vigor on especially cold mornings, not only to summon, but to rouse. The belief was that people would cling to bed too long otherwise, hoping to burrow deeper into warmth. Imagine the resentment that sound must have sparked, pulling bodies out of the only comfort they had managed to create in the long night. The debate lingers among scholars whether castle mornings began before first light or waited for dawn. Some argue that in households with strict routines, servants rose in darkness, guided by torchlight, to prepare fires and bread. Others suggest that in harsh winters, even lords allowed the day to begin later, conceding briefly to nature's tyranny. Whichever the case, dawn inside a castle never promised warmth, it promised labor. You wander into the great hall again, guided by the fading echo of the bell. The hearth is low, embers glowing faintly beneath ash. A servant stirs them half-heartedly, their breath fogging as they bend down. Another drags logs across the rushes, the scrape loud in the morning stillness. These first tasks of the day were endless, coaxing fire back to life, sweeping away the mess of last night, laying fresh rushes. Each action fought against the evidence of cold that had invaded during sleep. You crouch near the hearth and extend your hands. The warmth is weak, hesitant, a whisper compared to the roar of the night before. Still, your fingers tingle as blood stirs back into them. You imagine servants huddling here at dawn, hands outstretched, faces drawn tight. For them, the bell was not a song of welcome, but a summons back into discomfort. An odd but revealing tidbit. Some castles had portable braziers carried from room to room, their coals glowing like small suns. Servants might place one near the high table in the morning, a feeble attempt to thaw the space before the Lord appeared. Yet the coals rarely lasted long, and carrying them left trails of smoke and ash across stone floors. In a world where every ember was precious, moving heat was as much ceremony as necessity. You look up at the rafters. Frost glitters there, clinging to beams, proof that the night's chill penetrated even here. A pigeon flutters suddenly, disturbed from its perch, scattering dust and frost down toward you. The cold is not gone. It lingers in every crevice, mocking the idea of morning. The smell of bread drifts faintly from the kitchens, mingled with the tang of smoke. Your stomach grumbles, but you know breakfast will be plain. Coarse bread, maybe broth, perhaps a weak ale. Enough to fill, not enough to comfort. And as you picture servants balancing trays, their hands trembling from the cold, you realize the day is not about relief. It is about endurance, again and again. One reality that strikes you now: there was no concept of weekend here, no pause for rest. Each morning mirrored the last, bells calling, fires struggling, bodies dragging themselves from straw. Winter turned days into a blur of sameness, a cycle of cold meals, colder beds, and endless chores. Did people even dream of spring? Or was hope too dangerous when frost still painted the beams above their heads? You close your eyes and hear the bell again. Slower now, the echo fading. You think of those who rose grudgingly from beds of straw, who wrapped themselves in stiff wool, who braced themselves for another day of smoke and stone. Sleep was over, though it had never been deep, and dawn, though it promised light, carried no promise of warmth. As you open your eyes again, the hall feels larger, emptier. The morning bell was a command, not a comfort. It called people back into a world where cold ruled and survival depended on work. And you ask yourself, standing here with the frost glittering above, could you find the strength to rise each morning to that sound, knowing the night had given you no rest? You step closer to the shuttered window, curiosity tugging you to glance beyond the stone walls. The latch resists, swollen with damp, but finally creaks open. A breath of air slaps you in the face, sharper than a knife, carrying the scent of iron and snow. You lean forward, peering out across the castle grounds, and see it the moat. No longer a pool of shifting water, but a wide, still surface glazed with ice. One reliable truth from medieval chronicles is that moats often froze solid in the depth of winter. Defences that once promised to drown intruders turned into glassy walkways leading straight to the walls. Guards dreaded these seasons, for what protected the castle in summer became a weakness in January. A moat iced over wasn't just silent, it was an invitation. The sight is breathtaking, if unsettling. The moonlight reflects off the frozen sheet, silver rippling across its surface, broken only by cracks like spiderwebs. Snow rests on the edges, untouched, smooth as parchment. It looks peaceful, but you know peace is always deceptive here. Imagine lying in bed, half asleep, and wondering whether footsteps might echo across that frozen skin in the dead of night. A curious tidbit lingers in folk tradition. Villagers near castles sometimes used frozen moats as skating grounds, sliding across on bone skates strapped to boots. You picture children laughing, their voices bright against the hush of snow, even as guards scowled from the battlements above. To the soldiers, the ice was danger. To the young, it was delight. Two perspectives on the same sheet of winter glass. Not all historians agree on how dangerous frozen moats really were. Some argue that the ice often cracked under weight, making it perilous for attackers. Others believe determined raiders used the freeze as cover, sneaking across at dawn. Either way, the moat outside your window seems both beautiful and threatening, a paradox shimmering beneath the moon. You rest your elbows on the sill, feeling the stone damp under your sleeves. The wind slides in around the edges, icy enough to sting your teeth. You can almost hear it whistle across the moat, carrying faint echoes from beyond. The bark of a dog, the groan of a tree. The castle may feel isolated, but sound travels strangely well over frozen water. Nights here were never truly silent. A memory surfaces from old accounts. Defenders sometimes hacked at the ice with axes to keep the moat liquid, working for hours in bitter cold. Imagine the rhythm of steel on ice, the spray freezing instantly on cloaks, the exhaustion written on every swing. Did they curse as much as they prayed? Likely both. And when the ice thickened again by morning, their labor mocked them, undone by nature overnight. The smell of the air through the shutter is startling sharp, metallic, almost clean compared to the smoky corridors inside. You draw it into your lungs, but the cold burns as you exhale. Your breath mingles with the frost and vanishes instantly. To stand here is to feel the fragility of skin, bone, life itself. How could anyone find true rest, knowing this frozen moat, both protector and betrayer, lay just outside? You glance down at the ice again. Tiny cracks zigzag like veins across its surface. You wonder who else stood here, centuries ago, staring out with the same unease. a lord calculating defences, a servant daydreaming about skating, a guard squinting for shadows in the dark. The moat belonged to all of them, in fear, in play, in vigilance. A curious little practice. Some households used the moat water for chores when it wasn't frozen, hauling buckets for washing, cooking, even brewing ale. But in winter, when the surface hardened, daily life shifted. Snow was melted instead. A slow and frustrating task, yielding little water compared to effort. Every patch of ice became both barrier and necessity. You close the shutter slowly, the latch groaning as it seals. The wind's whistle dulls, but not fully. The draft still lingers at the edges, sliding along the floor. You step back, cloak tight around your shoulders, and the image of the frozen moat stays with you. A mirror of the night sky below, silent and treacherous. A constant reminder that cold could alter not just comfort, but safety itself. As you turn away, you realize that sleep inside these walls was never only about battling drafts or straw beds. It was also about fear, fear of what the winter transformed outside. Could you close your eyes, knowing that the very water meant to defend you had become a frozen bridge? Would your dreams hold peace, or would they echo with the sound of footsteps creeping across the ice? You close the shutter, but the image of the frozen moat clings to your mind like a shadow. If the moat was a paradox protector and betrayer, then what of the men stationed beyond it? Somewhere out there, on the ramparts or by the gatehouse, a lone guard stamps his feet against the frost. The thought draws you out into the bailey, your cloak heavy, the night pressing down like iron. It is well documented in chronicles that castles never truly slept. Even as nobles and servants curled into straw and furs, the night watch remained awake, pacing the walls, listening for sounds in the dark. These sentries endured the cold without roaring fires or curtains to shield them. Their only companions were weapons, lanterns, and their own stubborn determination not to nod off. You imagine standing in their boots, leather stiff with ice, fingers numb around a spear, breath plumes in great white clouds, whisked away by the wind before your eyes can follow them. Each inhale bites the back of your throat, each exhale leaves your lips cracked. The sky above glitters with stars, but the beauty doesn't comfort it, only reminds you how vast and indifferent the night really is. A curious little anecdote from military records. Guards sometimes tucked hot stones into their cloaks, carried up from the kitchens just before their shift. Wrapped in cloth, the stones radiated heat for an hour or two before cooling. Imagine the relief of clutching one to your chest, the warmth ebbing slowly like a fading heartbeat. By the time the stone was cold, your shift was far from over. Historians remain divided on whether guards truly kept strict vigilance or often dozed at their posts, lulled by monotony and exhaustion. Punishments for sleeping on duty were severe, sometimes fatal, so the risk was great. Yet the human body has limits. Standing still in cold for hours frays even the toughest will. Did guards pace restlessly to stay awake, whisper prayers into the dark, or hum to themselves under their breath? Likely all three. You step onto the imagined battlement, hands gripping the parapet. The stone is rimed with frost, slick beneath your gloves. Below, the moat glimmers faintly, a silver ribbon under the moon. The silence is profound, broken only by the crunch of your boots and the faint creak of wood as the drawbridge shifts in the wind. Each sound carries far, magnified by the stillness. You realize how exposed the guard must have felt, his senses sharpened not by comfort but by fear. A peculiar superstition clung to night watchmen. Many believed the hours before dawn were haunted, the wolf time, when spirits wandered most freely. A torch sputtering, a strange creak in the timbers, even a sudden gust, any could be seen as omens. Some guards carried charms stitched into their tunics, small relics or bones, believing they offered protection. Whether against raiders or spirits, it hardly mattered. Alone on the wall, faith was as vital as a weapon. You try to picture yourself enduring such hours. Your toes curl in your boots, half numb. Your eyes sting from the wind, watering until tears freeze on your lashes. Every muscle aches from stamping, from shifting weight. Perhaps you mutter aloud, just a little longer, just until the bell, clinging to time as though it were a rope across a ravine. Down in the bailey, the kennels stir. Dogs bark suddenly, sharp and wild, echoing against stone. Your heart leaps. Was that an intruder? Or just a fox skirting the walls? The dogs settle again, leaving silence heavier than before. That silence is its own enemy, wearing down resolve, convincing you nothing matters until you blink and miss the shadow crossing the moat. One harsh truth: guards were expendable. If one froze to death on duty, another filled the post. Chronicles tell of men found stiff at dawn, their spears still upright beside them, as though they had refused even in death to abandon their station. Did they die standing from loyalty, or because their bodies simply locked into place? Either way, the image haunts you. You lift your head and watch the stars a moment longer. They shine sharp, distant, and utterly indifferent. To a guard, they must have been both comfort and torment. Comfort, because they gave light. Torment, because they reminded him how small he was beneath them. Could you rest after such a shift? Could you return to a straw bed and find sleep when your bones still ached from hours in the frost? The thought lingers as you step back from the imagined parapet, cloak pressed close. The guard on night watch was perhaps the loneliest figure in the castle, awake while all others dreamed, wrestling not only with fear of attack, but with the relentless cold gnawing at his resolve. And you wonder, in such a role, was sleep ever sweet when it finally came? Or was it haunted always by the memory of shadows that might or might not have moved in the dark? You leave the parapets behind, slipping back toward the heart of the castle where a different kind of night watch burns. Down a set of stairs and through a narrow arch, you enter the kitchens. At once the air changes. It is still cold, but here you feel a pulse of warmth radiating from the hearths, faint embers still glowing under heaps of ash. The smell of char lingers, bread crust, roasted meat, a faint sweetness of spilled ale. It is generally accepted in studies of domestic life that castle kitchens were among the warmest rooms in the fortress. Ovens built into thick stone walls retained heat long after fires were doused, and bread baking in particular kept the air cozy compared to other chambers. But warmth here was fickle. At night, when fires dwindled to glowing coals, the kitchens cooled quickly. Servants who lingered found comfort for an hour, only to be chased out again by drafts slipping under doors. You crouch near one oven, brushing aside ash with the toe of your boot. Heat seeps out sluggishly, just enough to thaw your fingers. Imagine yourself a scullion, stealing moments of drowsy warmth here before a cook discovered you. Perhaps you would curl in the corner, cheek against a flour sack, trying to drift into sleep. Yet flour dust would choke your breath, vermin would rustle near your ears, and the cold would creep back once the coals faded. A curious little custom recorded in some manorial accounts. Bakers often began their work before dawn, so by the time the household stirred, fresh bread already filled the hall. That meant night in the kitchens was not silent, but punctuated by the thud of kneading, the scrape of peels sliding loaves into ovens, the crackle of kindling coaxed to flame. Sleep for the workers here was a fractured luxury, stolen between batches, their dreams scented always with yeast and smoke. Historians disagree about how much heat from the kitchens reached the rest of the castle. Some argue that the ovens acted as natural radiators, warming adjacent chambers. Others insist the benefit was minimal, lost to thick walls and high ceilings. As you stand here, the evidence seems clear. Even next to the hearth, your toes still ache from the cold. Comfort is immediate but not lasting, a flame too small for so much stone. You trace your hand across a wooden table scarred by knives, the surface dusted faintly with flour. You imagine servants rolling dough here, their fingers stiff with cold despite the fire. They must have laughed sometimes, or bickered, or whispered gossip, the sounds bouncing off low ceilings. This room, warmest in the castle, was also the busiest. The warmth itself came at the cost of endless labor. An odd anecdote. In some kitchens, servants tucked dough into their sleeves to soften near their skin before baking. The body became an oven when the real fire lagged. Imagine lying down to sleep later, cloak stiff with dried flour, the smell of yeast clinging as if you were part of the bread itself. Comfort and labor entwined so tightly that they could never be separated. The room grows darker as the coals fade further. You notice frost edging the barrels of water, the surface glazed thinly like glass. Even here, where heat once roared, the cold waits patiently for its turn. The stone walls release chill steadily, a reminder that warmth was never permanent inside a fortress. Servants might huddle near the oven after work, but by dawn the kitchen felt like any other chamber, inhospitable. You kneel to the hearth and poke at a coal with a stick. It glows briefly, a ruby buried in ash, then dims again. That single pulse of warmth is oddly comforting, yet its fragility unsettles you. To sleep in a castle was to live by these embers, fleeting, faint, never enough. Another curious truth. Animals sometimes shared the kitchens, not only for scraps but for the heat. Cats prowled for mice, dogs curled by the ovens, chickens roosted in corners. Their presence was noisy, messy, but their warmth undeniable. Imagine falling asleep here, pressed against a sack of flour, with a hound's flank against your back and the faint rustle of feathers overhead. Perhaps that was the truest comfort the kitchen offered. You rise again, brushing ash from your cloak, and glance once more at the ovens. Their mouths gape black and empty now, like cavernous eyes. In a few hours, they will roar with life again, filling the air with steam and smoke. But at night, they remind you of a cruel rhythm. Warmth is borrowed, never kept. As you leave the kitchen, stepping back into the corridor where cold waits like a patient adversary, you ask yourself, if you were a servant here, would you risk curling up in the kitchen each night? Soot staining your skin, flour clogging your breath, animals snuffling near your face? Or would you trudge back to the straw pallets in the damp quarters, resigned to the frost? Either way, the morning would still find you weary, for true rest was rare in these walls. You step out from the kitchens, brushing a dusting of flour from your cloak. The faint warmth fades almost immediately, replaced once again by the castle's clammy breath. As you make your way down a side passage, you pass through a laundry space, though in this season the word feels like a cruel joke. Here, the cold takes an even stranger form, for what was once wet fabric stiffens into boards of ice. One well-documented fact of medieval life is that laundry in winter was dreaded. Clothes were washed rarely to begin with, partly because soap was harsh, partly because drying them was an ordeal. In the depths of January, tunics and sheets hung out in the courtyard froze solid, stiff as armor plates. You imagine lifting a shirt from the line only to find it rattling like wood in your hands. Impossible to fold, impossible to wear. You run your fingers over a linen cloth draped on a rack near the wall. It is stiff, frozen into the shape of the wind that caught it before it dried. The fabric crackles faintly as you touch it, brittle and unyielding. Imagine pressing such a garment against your skin in the morning. The first sensation, not softness but shock, cold biting as sharply as any dagger. A curious little habit. Some servants resorted to sleeping with damp laundry tucked near their bodies, letting their own heat dry it overnight. It was uncomfortable. Even dangerous moisture invited chills and fevers, but sometimes there was no choice. You shudder at the thought of rolling in straw while a wet tunic clung to your chest, steaming faintly in the torchlight. There is still scholarly debate about how often noble households insisted on fresh linens during winter. Some argue that wealthy lords demanded frequent changes, regardless of the hardship. Others suggest that even they conceded to the season, tolerating weeks in the same garments rather than endure the misery of frozen cloth. Whichever the truth, you suspect every winter was a compromise between cleanliness and survival. You picture the laundresses at work here, hands raw and red, plunged into icy water hauled from the moat or melted snow. Soap stings their cracked skin, breath fogs above their tubs, and their arms ache from wringing heavy cloth. At night, those same hands still throb, while the garments they washed hang stiff and useless in the cold air. Sleep for them must have been shallow, haunted by pain in their knuckles, the smell of lye lingering on their fingertips. The sound of fabric rustling interrupts your thoughts. You turn and see another sheet, swinging faintly as a draft slips through a crack. It creaks like wood as it moves, frozen folds clinking together. The image is eerie. Clothes that behave like boards, bedding that becomes sculpture instead of comfort. How many people in this castle lay awake under covers that felt more like planks than blankets? An odd folk belief lingers in some sources. Frozen laundry was thought to lock in purity, making garments healthier once thawed. Housewives might even boast of clothes so clean they froze stiff. Perhaps it was bravado, perhaps self-deception. Either way, you cannot imagine it felt like virtue when sliding into a frozen shirt before dawn. You walk further, boots crunching against frost that has crept in under the door. Buckets of water stand near the wall, their surfaces hardened into glassy sheets. Someone has broken one with a poker, jagged shards floating in the black water beneath. You dip your fingers briefly and yank them out again. The sting is instant, bone deep. Imagine plunging your whole forearm into such a tub for hours. No wonder fevers and aching joints plagued those who worked here. The chamber itself smells faintly of soap and mildew. The two scents clash sharp and acrid, then damp and sour. You wrinkle your nose, realizing that even when clean, the castle never smelled fresh. To live here was to exist in layers of odor: smoke, sweat, straw, and in this room the bitter tang of lye. Did anyone sleep easily when their bedding carried this mixture, or did they grow so accustomed that they ceased to notice? You pause beside a basket filled with frozen cloth. Each piece is bent at an odd angle, stiffened mid-motion, as though the garments themselves were caught in the act of fleeing the cold. You smile faintly at the thought shirts running away, stockings curling into themselves. But the smile fades quickly when you imagine trying to soften them against your skin, waiting for body heat to do what sun and fire could not. The truth presses on you. Winter stole comfort even from cleanliness. To wash was to suffer, to dry was to fail, and to wear was to endure. Servants here lived with cracked fingers, nobles with stiff sheets, and everyone with the knowledge that comfort had limits. You step back toward the corridor, glancing one last time at the laundry racks. They stand like gallows, bearing garments that creak and rattle in the draught. And you realize that in this castle, even the simplest act, pulling a shirt over your head, could be another reminder of the cold's victory. Could you sleep after that? Could you crawl under frozen covers, your skin stinging, your nose full of soap and mildew, and pretend you were at peace? Perhaps exhaustion made it possible, but true rest? You doubt it. The cold finds ways not only into your chamber, but into the very fabric of your life. You leave the stiff, frozen garments behind and make your way toward the outer bailey. The smell changes as you descend: less soap, more hay, dung, and the unmistakable musk of animals. You follow the sound of low knickers and shifting hooves until the stables loom before you. Their doors creak wide, and a different kind of warmth greets you, thick and steamy, rising from living bodies rather than hearths. It is a well-attested fact that castles often relied on their animals as a secondary source of heat. Horses, oxen, and even pigs produced warmth through their sheer bulk, their breath fogging the air in great plumes. Stable boys, weary from long days of mucking stalls, sometimes dozed in corners, grateful for the radiating heat of the animals they tended. Compared to icy chambers upstairs, the stables could feel almost hospitable. You step inside, boots sinking into straw damp with melt and manure. The smell is heavy, earthy, pungent, yet oddly comforting. A horse stamps its foot, the sound ringing against the timber beams. Another exhales sharply, a gust of steam billowing from its nostrils, momentarily warmer than any torch. Imagine lying down nearby, cloak pulled tight, body pressed into straw, and letting the animal's warmth seep into your bones. discomfort mingles with relief. A curious little glimpse into medieval life. Pigs were sometimes brought into human living quarters during severe winters. Their heat was so valuable that families treated them like mobile furnaces despite the mess. In a castle, animals stayed mostly in their stables, but servants still slipped inside for warmth. You can almost picture a boy curled against a dog by the horse's legs, drifting into uneasy dreams while hooves shifted inches away. Scholars still debate whether noble families ever stooped to sleeping in the stables themselves during bitterest winters. Some suggest it was unthinkable, a collapse of dignity. Others argue that necessity sometimes blurred all boundaries. After all, survival cares little for titles. As you stand here now, with the air warmer than any corridor you've passed through, you begin to believe the latter. Pride is brittle in January. You move slowly along the stalls, running your hand across rough wooden partitions. The boards are chewed in places, gnawed by restless teeth. The floor crunches under you straw, frozen patches, something slick. Life here is never still. Even at night, animals shuffle, snort, paw the ground. Sleep beside them would be fragmented, broken by sudden noises. Yet compared to icy silence upstairs, perhaps the bustle of beasts offered comfort. One odd superstition lingers in rural tradition. Horses were thought to see spirits others could not. A horse, staring suddenly into the dark, ears pricked, might make a stable boy shiver more than the cold ever could. Was it a rat, a shadow, or something less visible? Imagine trying to sleep as your only heater whinnies in alarm, eyes rolling white in the dim torchlight. You pause beside a mare, her coat glossy even in the gloom. She snorts, leaning toward you, her breath brushing your cheek like warm mist. For an instant, the cold recedes. The intimacy is startling you, a human, reliant on the steady warmth of this creature for comfort. In a castle where stone mocks every effort at insulation, it is the animals that feel most alive, most generous. You glance toward the ceiling beams, thick with cobwebs, and see condensation dripping steadily, warmed by body heat below. The air is damp, cloying, but undeniably warmer than any chamber you've visited tonight. To live in a stable was to trade one discomfort for another, smell and noise in exchange for heat. Would you make that bargain? Many did. The straw beneath your feet shifts as you move. It is damp, heavy, but still softer than bare stone. A boy asleep here might wake itching, but at least he wouldn't wake with frost clinging to his blanket. Sleep was never luxurious in the castle, but sometimes it was less miserable in places not designed for humans at all. You breathe deeply, letting the stable air fill your lungs. It carries more life than the smoke-thick corridors and the frozen chambers. You realize that for all its filth, this space feels more habitable. Animals, unaware of the drafts, simply breathe, eat, and sleep. Their indifference is oddly reassuring. Perhaps to rest here is to borrow not just their warmth but their calm. And as you step back toward the door, the warmth ebbs quickly, stolen by the night beyond. You glance once more at the horses, steam curling above them like ghosts of summer. You wonder, if given the choice between a curtained bed with icy draughts and a patch of straw beside a beast, which would you choose? Could you surrender dignity for warmth? Or would you cling to ceremony while shivering through the night? You leave the stables reluctantly, the damp warmth of animals clinging faintly to your cloak as you climb back toward the inner ward. The air grows sharper again, biting at your nose and stiffening your fingers. A bell tolls faintly in the distance, calling not to labor this time but to devotion. You follow the sound into a small side building, the castle chapel. It is generally acknowledged that nearly every castle of note contained a chapel or oratory. Faith was woven into daily rhythms, and even in the deepest winter, prayers were offered morning and night. Yet stepping into the chapel does not mean stepping into comfort. The space is colder than the hall, the walls rising high, stone arching into shadows. Torches burn faintly in sconces, but their light is weak compared to the vast darkness above. You move down the nave, your boots echoing off flagstones. Each step sounds louder here, swallowed quickly by the silence that clings like frost. The benches are narrow and hard, polished smooth by generations of knees and elbows. You lower yourself briefly, and the wood chills through your cloak instantly, numbing your thighs. Imagine sitting here through long services, shivering as chants echoed while your body begged only for warmth. A curious little tradition. Herbs were sometimes burned in censers not only for symbolism but also for scent. Frankincense and myrrh masked the odor of damp clothing and unwashed bodies. Yet smoke rose slowly, filling the high arches, stinging eyes and throats. You picture worshippers coughing softly as they knelt, incense mingling with the ever-present draughts. Faith demanded patience, and patience demanded endurance. Not all historians agree on how well chapels were heated. Some argue that wealthy lords installed small hearths or braziers to keep noble families comfortable during worship. Others insist the cold was accepted as part of the sacred experience, a kind of penance woven into prayer. Standing here now, your breath curling in front of you, you lean toward the latter. The chill feels deliberate, almost purifying, as though discomfort itself were part of the devotion. You kneel on one of the prayer cushions near the altar. The fabric is stiff, stuffed with straw, edges fraying. As your knees press down, a sharp stalk jabs your skin, and you hiss softly. The altar above gleams faintly with candlesticks, their flames tiny compared to the vastness of the space. The flicker lights painted saints on the walls, their colors dimmed by centuries of smoke and frost. Their eyes seem to follow you, solemn and steady, watching as you shift uncomfortably in the cold. An unusual but memorable belief. Many thought that prayers rose more swiftly in cold air, the breath of worshippers visible as proof of devotion. To see your words curl like smoke toward the rafters must have felt miraculous. Yet at the same time, you imagine children whimpering softly beside their parents, toes numb, bodies aching for bed. Sacredness and suffering shared the same pew. You pause and listen. The chapel is never fully silent. Somewhere high above, the timbers creak as frost tightens. A draught whistles through a slit in the wall, tugging at your hood. The candles sputter when it reaches them, their flames bowing low. You wonder how many worshippers mistook such noises for omens, hearing messages in the creak of rafters or the hiss of wind. Perhaps they prayed harder in response, clinging to the hope that faith could outlast discomfort. Another oddity. Some noble families chose to be buried within their chapels. Tombs carved along the sides of the nave. Cold stone effigies rest here, hands folded in eternal prayer. At night, lying in bed with the chapel only a few rooms away, you might wonder, do the dead sleep more soundly in this cold than the living? Or do their memories linger, restless in the draughts that rattle the shutters? You stand and step closer to the altar, running your hand over the edge of the stone. It is polished, smooth but cold as ice, leaching heat from your fingertips. You imagine a priest lifting a chalice here, his breath visible, his hands trembling slightly. Did faith numb him to the cold, or did he grip the cup tighter, praying for both salvation and warmth? You glance back toward the benches, imagining the congregation assembled in winter, cloaks drawn tight, shoulders hunched, voices rising together in chant. Their unity might have offered more comfort than the fire ever could. To sing together in the cold was to remind yourself that you were not alone, that frost could stiffen limbs but not spirits. And yet, as you turn toward the door, you cannot help but wonder, after kneeling in such chill, could you return to your chamber and truly sleep? Or would the stiffness of your knees, the sting in your throat from smoke, and the memory of draughty saints' eyes keep you awake? Perhaps faith itself was the only blanket strong enough to let weary souls drift into dreams. You leave the chapel behind, its incense still clinging faintly to your cloak, and step back into the corridor. The hush is heavier now, as though the whole castle has pulled into itself for warmth. Your boots scuff against the stone floor, and a thought nags at you. How often were these surfaces cleaned? The answer lies just ahead, in a chamber that smells not of bread or incense, but of straw, herbs, and something darker, the garderobe. It is generally acknowledged that medieval castles depended on garderobes, small, narrow latrine chambers built into the walls, where waste dropped down chutes into pits or directly into moats. They were practical, necessary, and positioned strategically to keep filth outside living spaces. Yet, outside is a generous word in winter, for the cold rushed in just as easily as smells. To visit a garderobe on a frosty night was to invite the season in through your most vulnerable moment. You push open a narrow wooden door. The chamber inside is tiny, barely wide enough to turn. A stone bench juts from the wall, with a circular hole cut into it. Beneath, darkness swallows everything. The air stings your nose, a mixture of ammonia, damp stone, and the faint metallic scent of frost. You shiver, not just from cold, but from the intimacy of standing where countless others once relieved themselves. A curious practice emerges in some records. Bundles of moss, straw, or even scraps of cloth served as toilet paper. In some wealthier castles, linen rags were washed and reused, though one wonders how often that chore was performed willingly. Imagine fumbling in the dark, your fingers numb, clutching a frozen scrap of cloth. Not luxury, bare necessity. Scholars continue to disagree on how sanitary these spaces truly were. Some argue that frequent cleaning kept odors manageable, while others insist that stench permeated halls no matter what. Standing here, you can believe both. The draft rushing in through the chute masks the smell briefly, but that same draft is icy, cutting straight through your cloak. Which would you prefer? Warmth with stench, or freshness with frost? Neither offers comfort. You lean over the opening, peering downward. The darkness swallows your vision, but you hear faint drips, as though water still trickles somewhere far below. You imagine being a servant tasked with clearing the pit, hauling buckets of waste through the cold, gagging as the wind whipped both stench and frost into your face. Their nights must have ended not in peaceful sleep, but in exhaustion from chores no one wanted to name. An odd tidbit surfaces. Some believed garderobes doubled as protection for valuables. Nobles occasionally hid small items in recesses nearby, reasoning that no thief would dare search amid such filth. A jeweled dagger or pouch of coins, resting beside waste, it seems almost comical, yet perhaps effective. Would you, desperate and shivering, risk reaching into such darkness? You step back and run your hand across the stone wall. It is slick, damp, and cold enough to numb your fingertips instantly. The hole in the bench gapes like a mouth, and the draught pouring upward makes your eyes water. Imagine sitting here at night, cloak clutched tight, every breath a struggle between stench and frost. Sleep afterward would hardly come easily. Your body would tremble with the memory. Another curious belief. The very word garderobe comes from the idea that clothes were sometimes hung nearby, the ammonia in the air thought to repel lice. Whether true or not, you smile grimly at the thought of garments stiffening in the draught, their fabric reeking faintly. To live here was to accept strange compromises, clean clothing stored in a place of filth, prayers whispered in clouds of frost. The sound of wind whistling up the chute makes you shiver again. It moans like a ghost, rattling against the bench. You close the door quickly, pressing it shut, but the chill still seeps through the cracks. The garderobe has left its mark on you, a reminder that even basic needs turned into nightly ordeals in these walls. As you walk away, you glance back once, imagining a weary servant stumbling here in the dark, torch guttering, breath fogging, teeth clenched. Could you have done the same? Could you wake from a straw mattress, drag yourself down cold corridors, and crouch above that gaping chute while frost licked your skin? Perhaps you'd choose the chamber pot instead, dignity sacrificed for a little less misery. And so, another truth of castle nights unfolds. The body never lets you forget its needs, and the cold turns every need into a test. You wonder now, with a shiver, whether anyone in these walls ever truly slept through the night. You walk briskly away from the garderobe, grateful to leave its draught and stench behind. Yet another discomfort lurks in the silence of these stone walls. Vermin. The rushes beneath your boots rustle faintly, though no breeze stirs. You pause, ears pricked, and realize the sound is alive. Tiny claws, quick scurries, the soft gnaw of teeth on wood. You are not alone. One well-established reality is that medieval castles were infested with pests. Rats, mice, fleas, and lice flourished in straw bedding, leftover food, and damp corners. No matter the wealth of the lord, vermin respected no status. They dined on crumbs in the great hall, scuttled under tapestries in noble chambers, and nibbled at servants' bread in the kitchens. At night, when torches guttered, they ruled the silence. You crouch and brush the rushes aside. Beneath them, droppings pepper the stone floor, faintly glistening in the torchlight. The smell is musky, sharp, and it rises even above the smoke and frost. Imagine lying in bed, just drifting towards sleep, when something tickled across your ankle. Was it straw or whiskers? The uncertainty alone would snap you awake, heart pounding. A curious tidbit from medieval household guides. Rushes on the floor were meant to be changed several times a year, scattered fresh with herbs like lavender or rosemary, to mask the smell and deter vermin. In reality, many were left for months, layered with filth, grease, and fragments of food. Fleas thrived in such mulch, springing into furs and biting at skin. The herbs may have smelled pleasant for a week, but they were no match for rodents determined to feast. Scholars continue to debate the scale of these infestations. Some argue that rats were so plentiful they influenced health constantly, contributing to lice-borne fevers and spreading fleas that later carried plague. Others suggest the problem was exaggerated, that cats and dogs kept numbers in check. Listening now to the rushes whisper under your boots, you side with the pessimists. The sound feels too alive, too constant, to be anything but a plague of small bodies. You take a hesitant step forward and freeze again as a shadow darts across the wall. A rat, bold and quick, vanishes through a crack near the hearth. The torchlight catches its tail, thick and hairless, before it disappears. Your skin prickles. Imagine trying to sleep while knowing creatures moved inches from your straw pallet, their teeth sharp enough to nibble at food or toes. An odd belief was whispered in some corners of Europe. Rats were thought to be omens, their sudden appearance a sign of misfortune. To see them scurrying across the floor at night was more than discomfort, it was dread, a whisper that sickness or hunger would soon follow. No wonder people muttered prayers before lying down, hoping the night would pass without scratches or bites. You recall, too, that fleas and lice were inescapable companions. They hid in seams of clothing, in wool blankets, in the very straw meant to cushion your sleep. To scratch in the night was inevitable. Imagine the chorus of it, dozens of sleepers in the servants' quarters, all shifting, sighing, clawing at their own skin. Rest came not as deep peace, but as exhaustion overwhelming the itch. You glance toward a small wooden chest along the wall. Its lid is chewed at the corners, holes gnawed straight through. Inside, the remnants of grain are scattered, husks shredded. Servants must have cursed constantly, waging war with traps, cats, and dogs, yet never winning. The castle stored life itself in these chests, and vermin feasted freely. No wall, no stone, no fur curtain could keep them out. Another curious detail: some households sprinkled ashes around beds to track vermin prints in the morning. You picture a lord waking to find tiny footprints crisscrossing the floor near his bedposts. What comfort could follow such a discovery? Would you not lie awake the next night, certain that small teeth and claws were already creeping closer? The air seems to vibrate now, filled with imagined scratching. You rub your sleeve against your cheek, half convinced something crawls there. Sleep in this castle, you realize, was never clean. Even if you banished the cold, even if you layered furs high, there was no escaping the small, unseen world gnawing at the edges of comfort. You picture the servants again, curled tightly on straw pallets, half sharing warmth, half swatting at fleas. You imagine the lord himself, shifting in his feather bed, scratching at unseen bites while pretending dignity made him immune. Vermin made no such distinctions. They feasted on all, from stable boy to noble. And so, as you move toward the stairwell, your ears still straining for claws in the rushes, you cannot help but wonder, could you ever relax here? Could you close your eyes knowing that the silence itself twitched with life, that the cold was not the only intruder in the night? Perhaps exhaustion would carry you into uneasy dreams, but rest, true rest, would always be stolen by scratching in the dark. You climb another flight of stairs, boots crunching on grit left in the mortar seams, and push open a heavy oak door. A wave of still, stale air greets you thick with the scent of wool, smoke, and something faintly sour. This is the dormitory used by soldiers and retainers, a long chamber lined with pallets pressed shoulder to shoulder. It is widely attested in castle accounts that garrisons rarely enjoyed private quarters. Men-at-arms slept communally, sometimes 20 or 30 in one hall, their beds little more than straw sacks with thin wool covers. Compared to noble chambers, there was no pretense of privacy here. The only insulation came from numbers. Dozens of bodies, each one radiating heat into the cold air. You step inside and imagine the sound when the room was full. Snoring rose and fell like a tide, punctuated by coughs, sneezes, or the occasional groan of a man shifting in his sleep. Boots thudded on the floor as latecomers tramped in, armor clinking faintly. Laughter might have echoed for a while, coarse jokes traded in the dark, until the cold silenced even humor. Then only breath remained, thick with the musk of sweat, smoke, and ale. A curious detail from muster rolls. Some garrisons were given woolen cloaks specifically to double as bedding. Soldiers wrapped themselves in these at night, the same garments they marched in by day. It meant warmth, yes, but also meant that every stink of the day, mud, grease, horse, followed them into bed. Imagine trying to rest while your neighbor's cloak reeked of damp leather, or while your own still held the sour tang of stale sweat. Historians still debate how tolerable such sleeping arrangements were. Some argue that the sheer press of men created enough warmth that the cold was bearable. Others note that damp and vermin thrived in these crowded spaces, making sleep shallow and restless. Listening now to the silence of the abandoned room, you can believe both. Heat would gather, yes, but so would fleas, coughs, and nightmares. You sit on one of the pallets. The straw crunches beneath your weight, uneven and lumpy, with a faint squeak of vermin disturbed. The blanket smells faintly of smoke, rough against your fingertips. You pull it over your knees, and for a moment you can almost imagine yourself a weary soldier, body sore from drills or battle. You would collapse here without ceremony, boots still on, sword at arm's reach. An odd superstition. Some men believed it was unlucky to place a weapon away from the bed. Swords or daggers often lay close at hand, blades glinting faintly in torchlight. But weapons also reminded sleepers of danger, keeping minds restless. Could you sleep with steel brushing your fingers, your dreams sharpened by the thought of enemies just beyond the wall? The room itself carries a heavy dampness. The stone walls weep condensation, and patches of frost sparkle faintly where drafts find their way in. You run your hand along one wall and feel moisture soaking your glove. Imagine lying here, pressed against the outer edge of the dormitory, your shoulder wet by morning, the cold sinking deeper into your bones. Men fought for places near the center, where warmth and dryness were slightly more reliable. You glance upward. The rafters above sag under centuries of soot, blackened by smoke from torches and braziers. In winter, braziers might have been carried in to provide heat, filling the room with haze. Eyes stung, throats burned, but warmth mattered more than clarity. Some men fell asleep coughing, others woke with soot on their cheeks. Comfort was always balanced against cost. A curious tidbit from folklore. In some garrisons, soldiers told stories at night to distract themselves from cold. Ghost tales, bawdy songs, even exaggerated boasts of battle. The noise would echo down the chamber, rising until an officer barked for silence. For a little while, though, stories warmed them as much as blankets. Perhaps you too would cling to words when frost gnawed your toes. You lie back briefly on the pallet, staring up at the rafters. The air feels close, heavy with ghosts of breath from men long gone. You hear echoes of their sleep snores vibrating, coughs rattling, whispers dying into silence. The thought presses down on you. Here, rest was never solitude. It was always shared, always noisy, always tinged with the presence of others. And yet, perhaps that closeness offered reassurance. To hear the breathing of comrades, to know you were not alone in the night that might have softened the fear of draughts and shadows. Even if lice crawled, even if vermin scuttled, at least you belonged to a company, shoulder to shoulder against the cold. You rise again, brushing straw from your cloak, and glance one last time at the line of beds. They look uniform, impersonal, yet each once held a body that fought to rest. Soldiers, servants, squires, all bound by fatigue. You wonder, would you rather face the night in solitude, wrapped in silence but shivering, or in a crowded hall like this, scratching and snoring, but warmed by the presence of others? In this castle, choice was rare. Sleep, like everything else, was a negotiation. And in the soldiers' dormitory, the bargain was simple. Warmth for privacy, noise for company. Would you accept it? Most did, because the cold left no alternatives. You leave the soldiers' dormitory and climb another stair, this one winding tighter than the rest, until you emerge at the very top of the tower. The air is sharper here, as though the night itself presses closer. Before you, the watch chamber stretches wide and sparse, its walls interrupted by narrow slits, and its floor scattered with straw for padding. This is the rooftop refuge, the highest sleeping space, exposed and precarious. It is well known that guards and lookouts often kept vigil here, especially in times of unrest. Yet when no danger pressed, some curled on straw mats, snatching uneasy rest between shifts. To sleep so high was not privilege but burden. The cold gnawed harder at this height, the wind louder, the stone less forgiving. Every breath felt borrowed, every moment of warmth fleeting. You step across the chamber. The floor creaks faintly beneath your boots. Though stone should not creak, it is the timbers supporting it, groaning as the frost tightens. Drafts cut through the arrow slits, slicing across your face in invisible knives. You pull your cloak tighter, but the gust still licks your skin, raising gooseflesh instantly. Imagine trying to rest with such wind wailing constantly, a chorus of moans singing you not into sleep but into vigilance. A curious little tidbit from guard reports. Men stationed in these towers sometimes burned peat or dried dung in small braziers, desperate for warmth. The smoke was acrid, stinging eyes and throats, but the alternative was frostbite. You picture yourself crouched here, smoke curling into your lungs, eyes watering until you coughed yourself awake. Warmth and poison, yet again a choice between two discomforts. Historians still argue about how often these tower watchrooms doubled as barracks. Some suggest they were only for short shifts, with guards retreating to dormitories after duty. Others claim that in lean times, soldiers practically lived in these upper chambers, their bedding permanently spread across the straw. The uncertainty lingers like the drafts themselves always present, never fully answered. You wander toward one arrow slit and peer outside. The view is staggering. The moat below gleams like silver glass, the snow stretching beyond into darkness. Stars scatter above you, brighter at this height, almost cruel in their clarity. For a moment, the beauty is overwhelming, but then the wind slices across your cheek, and your eyes water too much to enjoy it. Beauty and misery coexist at every turn. An odd belief whispered among guards. Some thought the higher you slept, the closer you were to God, and thus safer. Others insisted the opposite, that spirits haunted the upper towers, shrieking with the wind. Imagine trying to rest, wondering whether the howls you heard were weather or something less earthly. Would you dream of angels or demons here? Perhaps both, depending on how tired you were. You crouch on a mat of straw near the wall. It is thin, damp, and stiff from frost. You lie down briefly, pulling your cloak around you. The floor beneath is so cold it feels alive, leaching warmth from your back. Each gust of wind through the slit whistles like a flute, rattling your ears. Sleep here would not come as comfort but as collapse, the body giving in after hours of fighting against fatigue. The smell is sharp smoke, damp straw, sweat from guards long gone. You can almost hear them muttering in the dark, stamping their feet, sharpening blades idly to stay awake. Some must have dozed despite orders, jerking awake when wind or comrades shook them. You wonder how many dreams began here, only to end abruptly with a call to arms. Another curious practice. Guards sometimes tucked dogs beside them in these towers, the animals acting as both warmth and alarm. A hound pressed to your side was a better blanket than straw, and its growl at shadows was reassurance. Yet, even dogs shivered in the draught, whining softly through the night. You rise again and move toward the center of the chamber. The emptiness feels vast, echoing with every gust. The torches here burn weaker, their flames bowing constantly to the wind. Shadows leap along the walls, stretched into monstrous shapes. You realize that at this height, the night plays tricks more readily. Every flicker feels like movement, every whistle like a whisper. Could you ever relax enough to dream, knowing the world pressed on every side? You close your eyes and imagine it, lying here in the straw, cloak drawn tight, blade in reach, wind keening endlessly. You drift in and out, never deeply, always half listening for footsteps on the stairs or wings across the sky. And when you wake, your body aches, your eyes sting, your mind is no clearer than before. The tower chamber is not a place for sleep, it is a place where sleep intrudes, uninvited, dangerous, shallow. As you turn toward the stair once more, you know the men who rested here did not dream of peace. They dreamed of survival, and even that felt fragile. You descend from the tower chamber, legs stiff from the imagined chill, and wander back toward the heart of the keep. Here, in the larger halls and passages, life never truly quiets. Even at night, not every soul is asleep. Somewhere, the restless pace of footsteps echoes faintly. A door creaks open, closes again. A cough stirs in the distance. The castle, like a body, shifts in its slumber. It is well known that medieval castles never fell into total silence. Servants worked in shifts, guards patrolled, fires were tended. People moved at all hours, carrying coals, hauling water, checking shutters. For every sleeper, another was awake, muttering under their breath, shoulders hunched against the cold. To live in a fortress was to share space with hundreds of others, and their needs, duties, and noises invaded your rest as surely as drafts did. You pause at the junction of two corridors. From one direction comes the clatter of a bucket, from another, the faint bleat of a goat disturbed in its pen. Overhead, timbers groan as if the roof itself dreams uneasily. You tilt your head back, listening, and realize how fragile sleep must have been with such a soundtrack. A curious little note from household records. Servants often carried embers in covered pans late into the night, transferring fire from the kitchens to chambers. Their footsteps echoed on stone, the faint rattle of iron lids announcing their passage. For those trying to rest, such sounds were both comfort and disturbance. Comfort because fire was being delivered, disturbance because footsteps meant wakefulness intruding. Historians are divided on whether nobles managed deeper rest than their servants. Some argue that curtains, furs, and featherbeds created a pocket of comfort strong enough to drown out noise. Others insist that even lords stirred at every creak, just as vulnerable to anxiety about drafts, intruders, and pests. Walking here, with echoes bouncing around you, you sense that no one was immune. Noise carried everywhere. You step into a side chamber and notice how the door scrapes the floor, wood dragging against stone. The sound makes you wince. Imagine dozens of doors like this, opening and closing at odd hours. Sleepers would wake, mutter, roll over, and try again for rest. A castle never sounded like peace, it sounded like labor. An odd superstition. Many believed that strange nighttime noises were caused not by people but by spirits wandering the halls. A rat scurrying across rushes, a shutter banging in the wind, a servant's hurried step, all could be blamed on ghosts. Whispers of hauntings drifted from chamber to chamber, making every creak a little more frightening. How many children, curled under thin blankets, trembled at sounds their parents dismissed as nothing. You move toward the great hall again, hearing faint chatter. Two servants linger by the hearth, voices low. One laughs softly, a brittle sound, while the other hushes them. Conversations like these must have been common, whispered in corners, filling the hours when sleep would not come. Perhaps they traded gossip about their lords, perhaps complaints about the cold, perhaps simply nonsense to pass the time. For them, speech was a shield against silence. You sit for a moment on a bench, imagining the hall full. Snores echo from one corner, whispers from another, the shuffle of a guard changing post, the creak of doors, the drip of melting ice from rafters. The night is alive, never still. Sleepers drift in and out, jolted awake by each new sound. Exhaustion, not tranquility, drags them back into slumber. Another curious record. Castle bells sometimes rang even at night, marking canonical hours for prayer. Monks within or nearby chapels rose to chant, their voices carrying faintly through corridors. For others, the sound was only another intrusion, slicing into fragile rest. You imagine lying in straw, just drifting off, when the bell clangs and chants rise, forcing your mind to stir once more. You close your eyes and listen harder. You can almost hear it. Footsteps, whispers, doors, dogs barking, rats scurrying, bells tolling, wind moaning. Layer upon layer of sound, weaving together into a restless chorus. How could anyone here ever dream deeply? Perhaps they didn't. Perhaps they learned to live with half sleep, a state between wakefulness and slumber, where the body rested but the mind stayed alert. As you rise and glance back down the corridor, a draught slides past your cheek, carrying the faint creak of wood. It sounds almost like a sigh, the castle itself exhaling. You shiver, not from cold this time, but from the awareness that sleep here was never fully private, never truly safe. Every sound reached your ears, every stir unsettled you. And so you ask yourself, in such a place, surrounded by whispers and footsteps at all hours, could you ever find true silence? Or would your dreams forever be threaded with the noises of others unseen, uninvited, inescapable companions in the night? You wander slowly back toward the heart of the keep, tracing the path you've walked so many times tonight. Each chamber you pass still carries its weight, the cold shutter rattling, the stiff laundry racks, the scratching in the rushes, the restless echoes of soldiers in their dormitory. They all blur together into a single truth. Sleep in a medieval castle was never gentle. It was always negotiated, always borrowed, never guaranteed. It is firmly established by chroniclers that winter inside these fortresses was relentless. Stone that protected against siege also trapped the chill, every wall a sponge for frost. Even the wealthiest noble, wrapped in silks and furs, slept no more soundly than a servant curled in straw. Comfort was relative, not absolute, and always temporary. The castle's magnificence hid nothing from the cold's persistence. You pause by a stairwell, feeling a draught slide past your cheek. It carries the smell of smoke, straw, and faint rot. You think of the countless people who once called this place home lords with anxious dignity. Ladies muttering prayers, servants scratching at fleas, children huddled in nurseries, guards stamping their feet on battlements. All of them fought the same adversary each night. A curious little observation preserved in letters: some castle folk swore they slept better in summer barns than in their own chambers in winter. The barns, full of hay and animals, provided a damp but genuine warmth. Imagine the irony, leaving a grand hall of stone to dream more soundly in a simple wooden shed. Luxury had limits, and survival often meant humility. Scholars still disagree on just how miserable these nights truly were. Some suggest people grew accustomed, their bodies hardened to draughts and vermin, their minds dulled to noise. Others argue that sleeplessness was a constant burden, thinning patience and fraying tempers. Likely the truth is somewhere between, resilience built from necessity, but at the cost of comfort we now take for granted. You find yourself back in the great hall. The fire is out now. Nothing left but grey ash and the faint smell of smoke. The benches stand empty, rushes scattered, shadows stretching long across the floor. You lower yourself onto a bench, pulling your cloak tight. The air is brittle, your breath sharp. If you closed your eyes here, would you drift into dreams? Or would you sit awake, listening for rats, shivering at draughts, waiting for dawn's bell to release you? Another curious belief. Some thought winter dreams were prophetic, sharpened by hardship and hunger. Visions of fire, feasts, or sunlight were said to foretell blessings to come. Did people cling to such ideas because they needed hope more than rest? Perhaps. To dream of warmth was its own form of survival. You tilt your head back and look toward the rafters, dark against the faint torchlight. Frost still clings there like cobwebs, glittering faintly. It strikes you that the castle itself seems to sleep uneasily, groaning in its beams, whispering in its draughts, sighing in its shadows. You are not just imagining the lives within it, you are imagining the building as another restless sleeper. And so, after your long wandering, the question circles back with sharper clarity. Could you sleep here, truly? Perhaps yes, if exhaustion outweighed discomfort. Perhaps no, if fear of draughts, vermin, and sounds gnawed too deeply. In the end, medieval rest was not about peace, but about persistence. People did not lie down expecting bliss. They collapsed, hoping only to rise again with enough strength to face another day. You close your eyes briefly, hearing echoes of laughter, of prayer, of scratching claws and rattling shutters. They weave together into a lullaby both unsettling and strangely human. For this is what castles were, not just stone walls but living organisms, full of restless bodies fighting to dream against the cold. And as you open your eyes again, you feel your own shoulders slump, your breath slow. Perhaps you too are ready to yield not to the castle's discomfort, but to its story. The journey has been long, the halls endless, the draughts insistent. Now it is time to let the night take you, if only gently, if only for a moment. Now, let your mind ease into stillness. The castle, with all its rattling shutters and whispering rushes, drifts into the background. You are no longer pacing its halls or pressing your hand against cold stone. Instead, imagine that the walls soften, the frost melts, and the draughts hush into nothing but a cool breeze. The torches sputter out one by one, leaving only darkness. But this time, the darkness feels kind. It wraps around you like a blanket, thick and quiet. The rats are gone, the fleas are gone, even the echoes of footsteps fade. What remains is only your breath, steady and slow, mingling with the silence. Picture yourself lying on the softest bed of straw. No prickles, no damp, just warmth. Furs drape over you, lighter than clouds, and the air carries no bite. The castle that once tested you now cradles you, its stone walls protective, its rafters calm. The night outside is still cold, the moat still frozen, but you are untouched by it, safe and quiet inside. Your eyelids grow heavy. Each breath grows longer, softer. Thoughts drift like smoke, breaking apart until only peace remains. Whatever questions lingered, whether you could survive the coldest nights, whether you could find rest, no longer matter. The answer now is simple. Yes, because you are already drifting. So sink deeper, let the castle fade into dream, its hardships dissolving into whispers, its frost into mist. The story closes, but sleep begins. Sweet dreams.